ThomHartmann.com.
Here with your world in 2 minutes, I'm your host, Luke Vargas. Donald Trump's picked to be the next U.S.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is page 34. Prior to this, we've set up how conservatives saw the 60s as a time of great social chaos and the rise of Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson and the whole consumer and environmental movements as threats to profitability and business, and they had to do something about it. So page 34. Lewis F. Powell Jr. was just sitting down to breakfast in his suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City when he received a call from the White House. The year was 1971, more than 40 years since the last great crash. The 60s had ended and the Vietnam War had destroyed the Democratic Party, leaving Richard Nixon as President of the United States. And Nixon needed a favor. A thin, ascetic man with wispy hair and fragile features, Lewis Powell had ancestral roots in America's first European settlement, Jamestown, and a lifetime of participation in the law. He deeply loved his Richmond, Virginia home and the law practice he had there, which mostly consisted of defending corporate interests and wealthy Southern white men. He walked comfortably, often in crepe-soled shoes, dressed as a Southern gentleman, and spoke so softly that people sometimes leaned forward to listen. But when he spoke, his words were precise, well-measured, and carefully considered. He was one of the most brilliant jurists of his day, and so it's no surprise that the Nixon White House was considering him for a seat on the Supreme Court, a job he turned down at first. But then when Nixon called him again at the Waldorf Astoria, he reluctantly accepted. As a Supreme Court justice, Lewis Powell was very much the moderate, and his legacy on the high court would reflect his balanced and authentic interpretation of the rule of law in America. However, just a few months before he was nominated by Nixon, Powell had written a memo to his good friend Eugene Sindor Jr., the director of the United States Chamber of Commerce at the time. And Powell's most indelible mark on our nation was not to be his 15-year tenure as a Supreme Court justice, but instead that memo, which served as a declaration of war, a war by the economic royalists against both democracy and what they saw as an overgrown middle class. It would be a final war, a bella omnium contra omnis, against everything the New Deal and the Great Society had accomplished. It wasn't until September 1972, 10 months after the Senate confirmed Powell, that the public first found out about the Powell memo. The actual document had the word confidential stamped on it, a sign that Powell himself hoped it would never see daylight outside of the rarefied circles of his rich friends. By then, however, it had already found its way to the desks of CEOs all across the nation and was, with millions in corporate and billionaire money, already being turned into real actions, policies, and institutions. During its investigation into Powell as part of the nomination process, the FBI never found the memo, but investigative journalist Jack Anderson did, and he exposed it in a September 28, 1972 column titled Powell's Lessons to Business Aired. Anderson wrote, shortly before his appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice Lewis F. Powell, Jr. urged business leaders in a confidential memo to use the courts as a social, economic, and political instrument. Pointing out that the memo wasn't discovered until after Powell was confirmed by the Senate, Anderson wrote, senators never got a chance to ask Powell whether he might use his position on the Supreme Court to put his ideas into practice and to influence the court on behalf of business interests. This was an explosive charge being leveled at the nation's rookie Supreme Court justice, a man entrusted with interpreting our nation's laws with absolute impartiality. But Jack Anderson was no stranger to taking on American authority and no stranger to the consequences of his journalism. He'd exposed scandals from the Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, and later the Reagan administrations. He was a true investigative journalist. In his report on the memo, Anderson wrote, Powell recommended a militant political action program ranging from the courts to the campuses. Powell's memo was both a direct response to Roosevelt's battle cry decades earlier and a response to the tumult of the 1960s. He wrote, quote, no thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack, end quote. When Sindor and the Chamber received the Powell memo, corporations were growing tired of their second-class status in America. Even though the previous 40 years had been a time of great growth and strength for the American economy and America's middle-class workers, and a time of sure and steady increases in profits for corporations, CEOs felt something was missing. If they could only find a way to wiggle back into the people's minds who were just beginning to forget the Royalists' previous exploits in the 1920s that had crashed our economy, then they could get their tax cuts back. They could trash the burdensome regulations that were keeping the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat safe. And the banksters among them could inflate another massive economic bubble to make themselves all mind-bogglingly rich. It could, if done right, be a return to the Roaring '20s. But how could they do this? How could they convince Americans to take another shot at what was widely considered a dangerous free market ideology and economic framework, and that Americans once knew preceded every great crash and war? But Lewis Powell had an answer, and he reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, the hub of corporate power in America, with a strategy. As Powell wrote, strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through unified action and national organizations. Thus, Powell said, the role of the National Chamber of Commerce is therefore vital. And out of the Powell memo came all these think tanks and judicial programs, college campus programs. He reshaped America, and it led directly to the Buckley versus Vallejo decision.
Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, what a weekend. The Women's March, literally all over the planet, biggest march in the history of the world, apparently. Even beat the international opposition to George W. Bush's war in Iraq back in 2003, which I think might have been the prior biggest one. So anyhow, a lot going on. President King Donald, shall we say, he's replacing everything with gold, has, including the drapes in the White House, held a press conference this morning, and he said, I'm going to start slapping tariffs on the goods of companies that manufacture overseas. I'm going to start doing that. Donald Trump has also said that he is going to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, unlike the Republicans. In fact, here's a clip of his saying that.
We got Social Security that's going to be destroyed if somebody like me doesn't bring money into the country. All these other people want to cut the hell out of it. I'm not going to cut it at all. I'm going to bring money in, and we're going to save it. Every Republican wants to do a big number on Social Security. They want to do it on Medicare. They want to do it on Medicaid. And we can't do that. And it's not fair to the people that have been paying in for years, and now all of a sudden they want to be cut. But we're not going to cut your Social Security.
So anyway, I've got like a half hour of that. On the line with us, David Horowitz, the founder and CEO of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. His new book, Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America. HorowitzFreedomCenter.org is David's website, and you can Skype him at Horowitz39. David, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I missed our back and forths.
Indeed. That's a generous characterization. So, you know, there are some, in fact, I wrote a book back in 2010 called Rebooting the American Dream, and the introduction in the first chapter about trade. And I said then in that book, and I've been saying it on this program since we started the show back in 2003, that the first party or the first person who comes out against this neoliberal free trade agenda that was put together by George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton back in the late 80s and early 90s, and embraced by both of them and by both parties, frankly, all the way through, although it's principally a Republican effort. You know, every single trade deal has been voted through the House and the Senate by a majority of Republicans and opposed by a majority of Democrats. And, you know, similarly, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So how do we help? How do I, as a guy who agrees with Donald Trump on these issues, that the Republicans should not be attacking Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, and that we actually should have an America First trade policy? And I realize the history of that phrase, but, you know, I think most people who are old enough to remember it are dead. We can perhaps reinvent it. How can we help?
Well, I think the first thing you can do is to quiet down, the war. How about a truce? The normal honeymoon for an incoming president is 7 months, and actually it was longer than that. This is according to Gallup, but recently it's been 7 months. I think Obama probably got longer.
I think Trump got maybe 75 seconds.
Trump didn't get 7 seconds.
Yeah.
The left has declared war on him. And I understand that they're in a state of shock because of the election and the unlikely candidacy, but no greater shock than the Bush family. Well,
the entire Republican Party is in a state of shock. I mean, the free trade has been a cornerstone of Republican ideology. It was, Nixon to China. Reagan really started pushing this stuff seriously. Hey, let's do away with tariffs. Let's have an international trade system. There were books written by several, famous neoconservatives. You're familiar with this, The End of History and the Last Man by Hayakawa, I think it was, et cetera, suggesting that, the theory that no two countries that have McDonald's have ever gone to war with each other. I mean, peace through trade, right? This has been a fundamental Republican concept. How is Donald Trump going to succeed against his own party?
Well, he will, because he's already bringing jobs back. It's just the leadership, just his threats. If you don't, invest in America, or if you send them overseas, I'm going to tax you. Now, all these companies, I don't know that, when GM says it's going to put $1 billion into the American economy, whether that's done because it's a good economic investment, or it's done because it's good public relations.
Well, that GM thing that Trump took credit for a week ago was actually negotiated 1.5 years ago with the UAW.
Oh, well, whatever. I mean, every day you're getting news of these companies saying, Ford, whatever, that they want to produce in the United States.
Right.
It's good PR for them.
Yeah, but I think you're right. This is, Trump is taking this as a PR strategy, and these companies are taking it as a PR strategy. But how does that replace policy?
Well, it's going to be the art of the deal, isn't it? He's not going to.
But that's no way to run a country.
Oh, sure it is. He's going to negotiate deals. The first
so he's going to have to negotiate the first deal with the Republicans. I mean, if he wants to renegotiate NAFTA was passed by Congress.
Republicans are in a state of shock too, and he has already affected them in big ways. So I think he will bring them along. His first deal will be with Great Britain. They're talking about some kind of a free trade with Britain, Canada, Australia, something like that. Here's another thing that you're going to support, and that is his New Deal for Black America. And I actually had something to do with his proposal for a $130 billion scholarship program for inner city kids. He's very serious about this. It's a big threat to the Democratic Party because that's their political base. And it's atrocious that they've been able to run the inner cities for 50 to 100 years, monopoly control.
Those disasters like San Francisco, you mean?
The disasters like
Seattle,
right,
like Portland,
Philadelphia, St. Louis,
like Los Angeles, like Denver. These are all cities run by Democrats.
Yeah, Los Angeles is a disaster.
Really?
Yeah, I'm talking about the inner cities where the kids, 40% of the kids never graduate from public schools that are run for the teacher unions. You can get behind this. Steve Harvey's going to get behind it. You'll get behind it.
Yeah, I'm not going to get behind school privatization, but that's and you know, if he wants to put money into the inner cities, I'm all in favor of that. The question is, where's that money going to come from?
Well, you have to.
But back to the question of how is he going to protect? Now, I'm reading dueling stories here, David. On the one hand, there's half a dozen places. Politico is the most recent one where they're talking about, Paul Ryan has already put together a budget that is going to reduce Social Security by about 8% over the next decade, and is going to cut Medicare and Medicaid by 43 and 45 or 47% respectively over the next decade. The latter for block granting. This is the complete opposite of what King Donald has campaigned on.
Exactly. That's why it's important for you. You asked what you can do is to just calm people down. There's so much hysteria on the left about Trump because Trump will go to war with Ryan and he will win the war, but he'll need support. I mean, this is the thing that's so.
He's going to be going to war with his own vice president, isn't he? I mean, Pence was a giant supporter of NAFTA. Pence was one of the biggest supporters of TPP.
I know Mike. I don't think he's going to do that. I think that Mike is a Trumpian now. You can't underestimate the influence that Trump is having on his own party. But he will, if Ryan does that, Trump will go to war with him.
So what happens to so-called conservative principles?
Think clearly, not with this hysteria, not that Trump is Hitler or Mussolini and a racist and all this crap that they're throwing.
I've said none of those things so far. I'm asking you, how is he going to successfully take on his own party?
He's the president.
Okay, I mean, the Democrats are going to be totally down with this. It's Bernie Sanders has already said, on trade. In fact, he issued a press release this morning saying, it's great. He took TPP off the table and he wants to blow up NAFTA. I'm there for him. The Democrats are going to work with him. I'm just wondering, how is he going to deal with the fact that his Republican Party has already put forward proposed legislation that is the exact opposite of what he's saying?
Actually, it's the first real working day. It's the first Monday after the inauguration.
Right.
You got to give him a chance. Trump is going to do a lot of things.
So you think he's going to keep these campaign promises? He's not going to touch Social Security. He's not going to let Paul Ryan cut Medicare. He's not going to let them block grant Medicaid. You think he's going to stand up for largely working Americans, most people who are taking advantage of at least those two latter programs? Go ahead.
That's how he got elected.
I know it's how he got elected. It's why I predicted he would get elected.
Pretty damn exciting, don't you think, to have somebody who gets elected, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican?
I'm all in favor of elections, and I'm all in favor of changing our trade policies, and I'm all in favor of protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I just
said that during the campaign. He said it during the primaries. He's obviously thought about it, and he's right. If the GNP grows at 4%, there'll be the money to do it.
Well, it hasn't done that since the first 3 years after World War II. I mean, we've averaged 3% per decade.
In fact, it's 3%. What's it now? 1?
Probably 1.5.
1% of the economy is a lot of money.
But you still have all these Republicans who want to do more austerity. They want to cut more programs. They want to cut back on financial stimulus. Oh my God, we can't invest money in infrastructure. You're going to have to raise taxes on billionaires to do that. I just don't see how it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
Okay.
You watch.
All right. Well,
This
your
Senate brigade-
confidence, David, inspires me. David Horowitz, his book, Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America. You can read it at davidhorowitz.com. horowitzfreedomcenter.org. And you can tweet him at Horowitz39. David, we'll have to continue this conversation, perhaps in a more contentious vein on other issues a little farther down the road. David Horowitz, thanks for being with us.
Okay, thanks for having me, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. It's 19 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Craig, excuse me. Oh, hang on just a second. Al, Sirius is on a commercial break right now. And Craig, oh, there's Craig. Craig in Linwood, Washington, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Just to kind of give you an update, my wife and I, over the weekend, Saturday, participated in the Women's March in Seattle, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And what the expected crowd size was around 30,000, but they got over 130,000 people to attend.
Yeah.
And
they were expecting 200,000 here in D.C., and we got, God only knows. I mean, the estimates are 500,000 up.
Yeah, it was a very peaceful march and a lot of solidarity and you had mostly women, but you had families and kids and very, very impressive and I was very proud of the people just acting very civil and the unity was just unbelievable, in the crowd. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I think the big challenge now is to take this moment, as Joe Madison would say, and turn it into a movement. That's going to be the big one. Craig, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, speaking of facts, Kellyanne, finally they're getting around to facts in the media. Isn't that just wonderful? I mean, you speak facts almost all throughout your whole program, and you're a pundit. So anyway, or at least that's how they define you. But I just wanted to say there are two cities here in Minnesota. St. Paul is where they had the demonstration on Saturday. There was over 100,000 people who showed up for that out of a city of 280,000. It's a very Catholic-y city. It's probably similar to something like Montreal compared to Minneapolis, which is very Lutheran German background and embraces more of a modern ethic. St. Paul is kind of more like an antique lady. But anyway, I wanted to say that I think we are seeing a movement being born, and now we have to roll up our sleeves and just get to work. So it's a great thing. I mean, I was just bowled over I just feel so much better knowing that there are so many people, not only in this country, but throughout the world who, we've been consolidated in a movement. And if you noticed, all the speakers included it wasn't just a women's march. It was all, people were represented. I was sorry to see that there weren't more American Indians represented, but Angela Davis brought them in and spoke about their struggle, which is all of our struggle, and that's the struggle for the environment. Yeah. And I hope that the deep state has the good conscience to, not follow Donald Trump when he wants to just press the button because he's pissed off.
Yeah, I suspect they will stop him. John, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 23 minutes past the hour.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, King Trump moves into the White House. King Donald, actually, I think we should call him. Typically, the naming of kings is, the first name. And, he thinks that he can do things by decree, right? Let's get the biggest companies in America together around the table and figure out what they want. And this morning I saw it wasn't a news conference. I don't know what to call it. A press availability, whatever. Where Donald Trump is in this room with all these, wealthy mega, Michael Dell and company and all these guys who are, manufacturing companies. And he says, they don't really care if the corporate tax gets cut. That's not as important to them as doing away with regulation. Well, gee, what a big surprise. I mean, the refineries would love to dump more poison in the air. It's more profitable for them. The paper companies would love to dump more poison in the water. It's more profitable for them. The car companies, Volkswagen would be very, very happy if nobody was bothering with their emissions, even though they cause, cancers and asthma. But hey, we don't need those stinking regulations. The banksters, I mean, he's got, 5 Goldman Sachs people now so far in his inner circle and his cabinet. One of them helped write his speech, his inaugural address, Steve Bannon, former Goldman Sachs executive. And, it's so on it goes, right? The King Donald show, complete with now gold in the Oval Office. The King Donald show is either launching or unraveling right in front of us. There is now a lawsuit. The group CREW, which what does CREW stand for? Something about ethics in government, but. CREW has just filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump saying that, here it is, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington is what CREW stands for. Their website, citizensforethics.org. And as Donald Trump was sworn in as the 45th president of the United States, Citizens for Responsible Ethics in Washington Executive Director Noah Bookbinder released the following statement. Now that he's taken the oath of office, President Trump stands in violation of the Constitution's Emoluments Clause. He swore on the Bible to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, but by continuing to accept payments from foreign governments, he has already failed. So he also appears to be in violation of his lease on the old post office site, the Trump International Hotel. So they've got a GSA complaint, then they've got a suit. There's just a whole bunch of different lawsuits that are coming at Donald Trump. We'll see where that goes. You've got Kellyanne Conway living in this alternative universe, apparently.
Alternative facts.
Yeah.
Alternative facts.
Yeah. I had that ready for David Horowitz, actually, because I was thinking, I'm going to debate him. He's got a bunch of really inflammatory stuff in his book. And then I thought, the Democrats' strategy, Bernie's strategy, the strategy that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer have put together is absolutely brilliant, which is to say, okay, Donald, in your campaign, you promised to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We're ready to help. In your campaign, you promised to change these trade laws that were all put into place by Republicans. We're ready to help. We opposed all those trade deals. Democrats say, yeah, I know Bill Clinton signed one and Barack Obama tried to propose another one. But by and large, Democrats opposed those trade deals.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So let's do some Aikido here. Use the energy of our opponent and, to flip him right over our shoulder.
is they argue that, well, globalism lifts other people from other parts of the world out of poverty in a sense. Like, if I own a business, why can't I set up shop somewhere in China or Cambodia or someplace like that and take somebody, or India, or take somebody who was making, 10 cents a day to making, $10 a day? Isn't that lifting someone out of poverty? What are your thoughts on that? And
yeah, it is lifting someone out of poverty. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's like, please don't try to pretend to me that you give a rat's ass about that. Please don't try to pretend to me that you really care about that person in India being lifted out of poverty, because we all know that what you're really doing is you're saying, to hell with that guy in Flint, Michigan, who is making $16, $18 an hour working in that factory, or the guy in Indiana who was working in the carrier factory making $35 an hour. To hell with him, to hell with his family, to hell with the state, to hell with the United States. I'd rather make more profit by having somebody in China make this thing for 50 cents an hour. And yeah, it's going to lift them out of poverty, and I'm going to wave that flag like I'm some kind of noble person. You're not a noble person. You're a capitalist, and I get it. And frankly, if business people in this country will not behave in a way that benefits this country, we need to have rules that incentivize them to. And we historically did. We didn't, we've never said, and I'm not advocating that we should say, you can't, have something manufactured in China or India or something like that. We've never said that. Instead, what we said, and we were quite clear about it, and literally from 1793 until the 1980s, what we said is, if there's $1 worth of labor in a pair of shoes made in Connecticut, and you want to make those shoes in Mexico where it's 50 cents worth of labor, or in China where it's 20 cents worth of labor, then when those shoes get imported from Mexico, there's a 50-cent tariff at the border, so that it's still going to cost you $1 to make the shoes. If you bring them in from China, there's going to be an 80-cent tariff at the border, so it still costs you $1 to make the shoes. So you might as well just make the shoes here in the United States. In other words, we define the rules of the game the same way you define the rules of a football game. You say you can't just go up and punch somebody in the kidneys, right? I mean, It might be a great way to win a football game, take out the quarterback, but we're not going to let you do that, because it's not in the best interest of the sport. It's not in the best interest of the team. It's not in the best interest of the audience. It's just not in anybody's best interest except that one selfish son of a bitch pardon my phrasing, SOB, who punched the guy in the kidneys. You get it? And basically what these people are saying is, I'm going to punch my country in the kidneys. I'm going to punch a family in the kidneys in the United States. And I'm going to pretend that I'm doing it for some noble reason, because I really care about this poor family in China. Let China worry about poor families in China. That's why they have a government. That's, our government should be worrying about poor families in the United States. We've got cities that have been hollowed out. We've got rural areas, for that matter, that have been hollowed out by the loss of manufacturing in this country. And the two rationales that are most commonly put forward are the one that you and I just discussed, Michael. And then the second one is, manufacturing is crappy work anyway. We really don't want manufacturing here. Who wants to stand in an assembly line putting a bolt on a screw all day long for $35 an hour?
Right.
Nobody wants to do that. That's degrading work. Well, excuse me. I grew up in an era where people worked in factories. Half my, probably 3/4 of my friends' parents worked at Oldsmobile in the factory. My dad worked in a tool and die shop. There's nothing wrong with manual labor. In fact, manual, and I did a fair amount of it myself. I mean, working my way through college, I didn't complete college either, but I didn't work in an assembly line. But, I worked in a gas station. I was changing tires. I was doing brakes. I was pumping gas. I worked in a Bob's Big Boy restaurant as a cook and as a dishwasher. There's nothing wrong with that kind of labor. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It just needs, there's dignity in labor. There just needs to be reasonable pay. And as long as laborers in the United States are competing with labor from outside the United States that's a fraction of the price, David Ricardo laid this out in a paper called On Labor back in 1819. As long as the available supply of labor exceeds the demand, the price of labor falls.
Do you think we'll be able to sustain a manufacturing-based economy into the future?
Of course. China's doing it right now. Japan's doing it right now. Germany's doing it right now. Half of Germany's economy is manufacturing. They're one of the most advanced manufacturing economies in the world. Why? Because they protect their exports. It's very difficult if you live in Germany to import things from outside that country, things of consequence. And, and it's very easy for manufacturers in Germany to sell things in Germany. And the way they do it, they used to do it with tariffs. When I lived there in the 80s, they did it with tariffs. I wrote a novel based on this about a guy trying to get around tariffs. I'm very, very familiar with it. But, when they joined the World Trade Organization, they changed that to using VAT taxes. So now, if you want to export something from Germany, they discount it by 17%, which was the VAT tax that's only supposed to be charged to Germans. And if you want to import a car into Germany, a made in America car, they add 17% VAT tax to the import price. So, we're back to the how much does it cost to make those shoes in Connecticut kind of thing. And every country, every developed country in the world is using VAT taxes like tariffs, except us. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is interesting. I was just looking at the at my Twitter feed here. Happy Agnostic says, remember the 6th of November, 2018. The entire House of Representatives will be up for re-election. 33 Senate seats. Marching is good. Starting to apply political pressure now is better. One thing politicians care about more than their president is getting re-elected. And that is so true. The number for the switchboard for Congress is 202-225-3121. The White House comment line has been functionally disabled. The 456-1111 number used to go to the comment line, used to be a human being who actually answered it and would write down what you said. Now it goes to a recorded announcement that says, go to whitehouse.gov/comments and post a comment, that sort of thing. But and some people are attacking Donald Trump for that. It's actually a change that was made, as we noted on this show a week or two ago, by the outgoing Obama administration, who was like, okay, we're all done taking messages from the public, and we're cleaning the deck here for the next administration. And whether Trump is going to, King Donald is going to replace the comment line or what, I have no idea. But just beneath on my timeline on my Twitter whatever you call it, just beneath that, remember the 6th of November, you'll see a tweet from Laura Schneider, who I'm following and who I retweeted. And a picture of a giant rally in Berlin, 100,000 people, an ocean of people in Berlin protesting against the Nazis in 1932. Her tweet says, history shows that protests alone are not enough. In 1932, 100,000 people in Berlin demonstrated against the Nazis. And it is so true. Protests are not enough. We have to, as Joe Madison always says, and so brilliantly says, we have to take this moment and make sure that it becomes a movement. And I'm sure I'm badly paraphrasing him, but I get the sentiment, or I think I've captured the sentiment. I hope I have. And there are movements happening all over the place. I mean, there's a fascinating article by Owen Jones in The Guardian. The American left will be reborn under President Trump. We are certainly seeing that happen. The largest demonstration in the history of the world. Just amazing. Gary in East Point, Michigan. Hey, Gary, thanks for the call. What's on your mind? Gary? Gary, you got to listen to your phone, not your TV set or your radio or whatever it may be, because there's a time delay here and it takes time for electrons to make it to the satellite and all that kind of stuff. David in Seward, Pennsylvania. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Tom. And I had heard this weekend that Trump was signing some kind of executive order against the sanctuary cities.
Right.
And my question is on, can they come back on him and say, well, you're taking away the federal money. We can't protect you when you come to these cities now.
No, you can. I mean, there may be some kind of retribution that they can do, but it wouldn't take that form. But, you know, law enforcement protects the president if he comes to a city. It's just that simple. But the thing that's so tragic about this, first of all, I don't know if he has signed that or not, and if he has, I don't know what it says. I mean, there's a lot happening really fast here, and you know, I'm not able to catch every little piece of it, and I want to look very carefully at that one. For those people who don't know what we're talking about, though, David, this is a really important issue. And it's an issue that's been demagogued by the right all over the place. There are over 100 cities, I think it's 136 cities in the United States, where local law enforcement and local city councils have looked at the fact that there are people living in their city without documentation, you know, who are, quote, here illegally, and yet they are still human beings. And the very real problem that is caused by this is that if an employer beats an employee, or if an employer refuses to pay an employee, or if an employer rapes an employee, or if a husband beats his spouse or threatens to murder her, if that employee or that spouse is an undocumented immigrant, a person here without documentation, in most of America, they are afraid to dial 911 because if the police show up and say, you know, prove to me that you're a citizen, and they're unable to prove that, they get shipped off to an internment camp, right? They get handed off to ICE. So the idea of the sanctuary cities is, you know, you may have to deal with the immigration, you know, what used to be called the Immigration Nationalization Service. Now, I don't remember what ICE stands for, but whatever it is, you know, you may still have to deal with the feds with regard to immigration. But if you dial 911 because you're in a car accident, if you dial 911 because somebody hurt you, if you dial 911 because you're at risk somehow, you are not going to be deported. You are going to be protected. And that's just a basic human rights issue. And those cities that have passed rules to that effect, telling their police departments, you know, it's not our business what the immigration status is of people living in our city. That's the business of the federal government to enforce. It's not the business of the local governments to enforce. There's no law that says we have to. We're going to choose not to. Those cities have been called sanctuary cities. And yeah, they do provide some sanctuary, but the point is that they're not saying we're going to, you know, provide sanctuary again, you know, so that lawbreakers can live here. It's that we want to make sure that the citizens in our town are protected. So yeah, it's a tough one, and we'll see. David, I'm going to have to read whatever he signs before I can, you know, comment on it at length. But thanks for the call, Jill in Milwaukee. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. So as I watch King Donald sign us out of the TPP that Obama had negotiated with the United States in it, I'm just wondering if you think that it's possible that King Trump may just want to renegotiate it to be even, and there were, I guess, some protections for workers and the environment and some regulations in it. And could it be possible he's just thinking renegotiate it and, you know, take the rights and regulations out and make it better for certain countries like, I don't know, say Russia? And
well, they weren't part of the TPP,
rename it.
But I get what you're saying. We have, you know, we're going to have to figure this out. I mean, we all need to keep a close eye on this and be careful of the you know, soundbite assumptions. You know, because Donald Trump, one of the things that he's been fairly consistent about, even though he makes his ties and his cups and everything in China, you know, he says, hey, that's the smart thing to do business-wise because the way the law is organized right now, and we're going to change the law. You know, we're going to change the incentives for exporting jobs or importing products. And you know, I mean, he's been saying this for over a decade. It's for a couple of decades. And so the question is the Republican Party going to go along with something that is completely antithetical to a position that the Republican Party has taken aggressively for the last 40 years, aggressively and consistently at every turn? Are they going to go along with that? Are they going to fight him? Or is there going to be a compromise? And this is what I'm predicting. And this is why I kept trying to pin down David Horowitz, and he wouldn't go there. Is there going to be a compromise achieved between the Republicans and Donald Trump where they will give him something that looks like a
a tariff, or they'll give him selective powers to play, King Donald and say, you, Boeing, you are bad. We're going to slap you. But you, AstraZeneca, you're just fine. You keep importing your drugs. It's no problem because, you make bigger contributions, or God only knows what. I mean, if he continues to try to run trade policy as if he's a king rather than as if he's president, and if his party doesn't go along with him on this, it's going to be a big win for the Democrats, frankly, I think, depending on how it gets spun in the press. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is that the first two things Donald Trump did as president were to sign an executive order that raises the cost of buying your first home by about $1,000 on a million people. Average cost $500. So it's, $500 million boon for somebody. And I'm guessing it's the banksters, because the details of this, I've been looking all weekend for the details of this and been unable to find them. But number one, make first homes more expensive. And then number two, sign an executive order saying to all federal agencies, anything that has to do with the enforcement of Obamacare is now basically optional rather than mandatory. Well, that would include the IRS collecting, $7 million in Obamacare taxes from anybody who earns over $100 million a year. And, which is, it's something that the Republicans have been talking about a lot. They'd like to get rid of that tax on those rich people who fund their campaigns. So,
Right.
So whether they give him something that he can claim as a victory, or whether he actually takes the principled stand that he was arguing for during the election, and that I frankly think got him elected. I think the trade thing is 70% of what got him elected. And how this turns out is going to be very, very consequential for the future of the Republican Party. It has the potential to destroy the Republican Party. I had a conversation on Sirius XM with Michael Steele over the weekend, and he said, my political party that I ran, it's gone. Jill, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
That was a fascinating conversation on Steele and Unger and the radio show on Sirius XM. Just fascinating. Welcome back. And Brent in Roanoke, Virginia. Hey, Brent, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah. Tom, I think it's at our peril that we don't recognize that Trump is taking on the political parties, and that the corporate media, public broadcasting, the tools of the deep state are trying to bring him into line on these issues of regime change, the new Cold War, war policies. And so I think essentially that Trump is a con man who said whatever he needed to do to get there. Now he's in control. Now he has an interest in having successful policies. And remember that Obama said that he was a pragmatic, not an ideologue. So I think we need to, as Horowitz said, we need to calm down here and judge Trump on what he does, not on what he has said.
Right, but it's not just Trump. It's the entire Republican Party, because you can do something with executive orders, but you can't do a lot. And this was, one of the things that President Obama learned very, very early on when the Republicans started blocking everything. So will the Republican Party go along with Donald Trump's campaign promise of strengthening Social Security and not touching Medicare or Medicaid? Will they go along with him on his policy of ending nation building? Will they go and stupid foreign wars? Will they go along with him on his policy of doing away with these trade deals and negotiating bilateral trade deals country by country? I don't think they will.
We don't know. We do not know at this point.
I know, and that's why I said to David, my first question to him was, how can I help?
Okay, well,
and because I by helping Donald Trump change our conversation on trade, by helping him protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, by helping him, end the Republican love with stupid wars, started by Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, by helping him in those areas, we are blowing up the Republican Party.
Right.
And which is why prominent Democrats like Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer are saying, yeah, sure, I'll work with Donald Trump. This is going to be fun. Because, you know, it's like in your face to the Republican Party. And so the question is, are they going to do it with smoke and mirrors? You know, like I said, the first two things that Donald Trump did was, number one, a $7 million tax cut for very, very wealthy people. And number two, a rise by $500 to $1,000 on the cost of a brand new home for low income people. Right. So he's already the first two things. And they got completely ignored by the media because Trump grabbed the media cycle with his whole thing about the crowd size. And, you know, it's all about size for King Donald. Right. And but he, you know, it's masterful, you know, the way that he grabbed the media, the way that he got the media not to talk about what he was doing, but instead about what he was complaining about. And, you know, because we have a largely fact-free media, it's, you know, it's mostly about personality and spectacle. It's all bread and circus. You know, we're not getting the details. We're not really, I mean, how many times has it been pointed out during the election, you know, that the Republican Party is basically shills for the top 1%, and that the Democratic Party has been, you know, at least for the last couple of decades, basically, you know, front men for the top 10%, you know, the white-collar class. You know, whereas the Republicans are the billionaire class, and nobody's been representing the interests of the blue-collar class in a really, you know, heavy, significant, aggressive fashion, which is why Bernie did so well. Anyhow, Brent, thanks for the call. Good points all. We'll be back. It's about 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 18 dead across the South as climate change fueled hurricanes. Our weather is, you know, there's 8% more moisture in the atmosphere now than there was in 1980. Atmospheric moisture is both a greenhouse gas and is water in the air. So when the air decides to let go of its water because of a change in temperature, then that water precipitates out. It's called rain. There's a heck of a lot more of it than there used to be. And so the storms are more intense, the hurricanes are more intense, the cyclones are more intense. 18 people dead, in part because of the policies of Rex Tillerson and ExxonMobil. Are you hearing that anywhere on the news? At least not in the United States. I mean, you know, you turn to Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, they routinely tie climate change in with weather. Routinely. All over Europe. Climate change and weather, you find in the weather forecasts, they talk about, you know, here's how climate change is changing the weather in this part or that part or whatever it may be, and on it goes. Wayne in Bronx, New York. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, Tom? Good.
Hey,
I'm glad that you took David Orris to task when he was stating about the inner city schools and all that stuff. And it's kind of funny. I'm retired military, and I live in New York City. And all of the progressive cities' school systems are doing good. New York City school system is one of the better school systems in the country.
Yeah.
And he's going by stats that is like 30 years old.
Well, and not only that, he's basically cherry picking, basically, you know, black cities. And you know, when conservatives start talking about democratic failures in the inner cities, they're really talking about race and code.
Yes, I don't even know what he's talking about. If he come here to New York City and you go to the Bronx, around Yankee Stadium is now called Yankee Village. The South Bronx is no longer called the South, it's called Sobro. It is being gentrified. So what is he talking about?
Yeah.
You know, you have New York City school system that is so integrated right now, it's ridiculous. And for him to be using those code words, he sounds like a Trumpian, not like the Napoleon is, or going back in history, all those people that follow Napoleon to a disaster. You know, I'm a New Yorker. Trump is a New Yorker. Us New Yorkers, we know Donald. We know what he's all about.
Yeah.
You know, we know it's not the inner cities if the United States is failing. It's the outer cities. It's the cities in the Midwest, you know, that depended on the factories. That those jobs are never coming back. Why? Because of technology.
Right. Detroit and Flint are falling apart not because they're majority black. They're falling apart because the industrial base that used to support them. Detroit. I lived in Detroit when it had 2.5 million people. There's 700,000 people there now. It's not about race. It's about trade. And that, ironically, is where if Trump is successful in taking on his own Republican Party and taking on China and this whole neoliberal free trade consensus, that has infected both political parties largely since the era of Reagan. If he's successful in taking that on, it might actually be a good thing for the United States. I just don't believe the Republicans will let him do it. And in fact, I think that they're probably, you know, the bookies in Ireland are placing 4-to-1 odds that he gets impeached within a year. I think that's probably about right. I just don't think they're going to let him do it. They want a nice, safe, reliable Republican, you know, a genuine con man, a guy who, you know, who has a consistent story to tell, like Mike Pence, where, you know, he can look people right in the face and say, oh, we're going to give you a tax cut and we're going to help you out, average working people, while he's basically working as hard as he can to screw average working people. I mean, that's the Republican way, you know, to do it. Wayne, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Excellent points. Lisa in Seattle. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Hi, I really enjoy your show. And I'd like to say that if you think about it, Trump is probably the most hated man in the world. And I don't know if it's the history of the world because there's so many more people now than in the days of like Hitler or somebody like that. And how he had to feel on his big day of the inauguration and hearing all these voices echo and dump Trump, how they hate him. And, you know, I could see his family sitting there looking at, you know, I'm sure he thought he was going to come in on a golden chariot or something and hear the biggest march in the world. And, you know, another thing that he's doing, too, is he is like in the days of Teddy Roosevelt when he was in the big monopolies. Now, what did they call that? Remember they had a word for that? It was kind of like carpetbaggers or something where they call these corporate raiders.
Yeah.
What was the name?
I frankly don't remember, but Teddy Roosevelt was proud to call himself a progressive Republican. There is no such thing any longer.
We were different then. We were a different time. But again, he went against the business, and he made a statement that the businesses were evil and that he didn't want to fight against big business. He wanted to fight against the evils they were perpetrating.
Right.
And that's what you were saying early on the show about people are dying, and then, you know, you work people and don't pay them, and now how they're just getting rid of the unions, and, you know, and Trump is for all this. But I think, you know, I looked at him today when he came in. He looks like he's walking slower. He looks fatter. But if you notice, he's got a handshake where he almost tears your arm off.
Yeah. I haven't noticed that, but I believe you.
What's the deal with that? I mean,
he's an alpha male. He's all about being an alpha male. He's the biggest dog in the kennel. You know, he's the one who's going to bite you if you get too close. He's the one who you know, gets all the women he wants. He's the one who has all the power. He's the one who wears his ties down to the middle of his crotch to show how large his is. He's just, you know, he reeks of alpha male. And that's what I think that's all about, Lisa. But Lisa, thank you for your observations. They're brilliant. Judith in Schofield, Wisconsin. Hey, Judith, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Just a comment. Excuse me. King Trump, as I like to think of him, is really not a detailed person. He will be, and I feel that if Ryan and the GOP gives him a bill, and in it is cuts to Social Security, cuts to my Medicare, cuts to Medicaid, and all important different agencies that we have to protect the least of us, that he will just sign it because they say, here, sit down, here's the pens, sign it. He's not going to look at it. Pence will look at it and say, okay, Trump, please sign it because it's good.
This is where Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner may actually be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but may actually be a good thing because they have no loyalty to the institutional Republican Party. Neither one of these guys came out of the Republican Party. In fact, Jared Kushner, I believe, was a Democrat, although he was running a right-wing newspaper in New York. And Steve Bannon, of course, is God only knows how you define somebody who's just basically a white nationalist. But because they have no commitment to the institutional Republican Party, his vetoing legislation by Republicans that will hurt average working people will make him incredibly popular. And frankly, I think Donald Trump is more interested in being popular than anything else. And if doing, and Democratic policies are very popular policies. I can't think of the last time there was a Republican policy that was actually popular with the American people. In fact, that's a great question. If you can think of one, give us a call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, The Fate of the World and What We Can Do About It. And this is from page 165, The Lives of Ancient People. From the San and the Kogi Value, Community, and Cooperation, we are part of the world, not separate from it. Chapter. One of the oldest cultures on Earth is that of the Kung Bushmen. It's an exclamation mark to make the noise. Of the Kalahari Desert in the northern parts of South Africa. The exclamation point in their name, Kung, represents a sound in their language which we don't have in English. It's a popping noise made in the mouth by forming a vacuum between the tongue and the top of the mouth and then pulling the tongue down quickly. There are three other sounds in their language for which we have no letters, all of them clicks or pops, made by similarly clicking the tongue against the front of the mouth or the sides of the mouth and teeth. They're such a unique culture that although they're ancient, their language contains sounds that have traveled to no other human tongue on Earth. Over the past few decades, as they become more well-known, they've asked anthropologists and linguists that they be called the San, although most texts from before the 1980s refer to them as the Kung. They and their life are portrayed wonderfully well in the film The Gods Must Be Crazy. The San are racially distinct from the other Africans who have conquered the continent in the past millennia. Their skin is more yellow than black, and their eyes are slightly slanted as if they share a common ancestor with Asians, or perhaps are indeed an early ancestor of the Asians. Their hair is black and curly like other Africans, but they're comparatively short and thin, often standing less than 5 feet tall and weighing fewer than 100 pounds. The lives of the San were first chronicled quite elegantly by Lawrence Vanderpost, a South African explorer and writer. In his 1961 book, The Heart of the Hunter, he tells of coming across a small Kung tribe of about a dozen adults and children as they crossed a particularly hot and barren part of the desert. Vanderpost and his fellow explorers started hunting some game so the Bushmen could have extra food to carry on their journey toward the lightning on the horizon, where the seasonal rains were beginning. The explorers spent an entire day hunting with their Land Rovers and provisioned the Bushmen well for their trip. As the little tribe was leaving, Vanderpost and his group stood to wave goodbye, but the Bushmen simply walked off with many smiles. No thank yous were ever given for all that food. One of Vanderpost's assistants, a hunter who'd never encountered Bushmen before, commented that they seemed ungrateful and uncaring. Ben, one of the other men in the group who understood Bushman culture, responded that to give another human food and water is only good manners and is routine behavior among the Bushmen.
If the white men had been starving on a long trek and the Bushmen had found them, they would immediately share their food and water, even if it endangered their own survival, and they would not expect a thank you in response. In fact, in San Bushman culture, to eat in front of another person who is without food is considered an immoral act, every bit as horrific as if in our culture a person were to walk out onto a busy city sidewalk, pull down their pants, and defecate. Everyone would be shocked and horrified. As it happens, the San do say thank you. They do it whenever they're hunting, when they're making a decision to take a life. No animal is killed for food by the San without being thanked by them, both at the time of the hunt and later when a dance is done for the soul of the animal. And animals are only killed when there is a clear need for food. For those of us who grew up in modern civilization, it's difficult to imagine a life and culture where such fundamental things are simply taken for granted. When we stop behind a car at a red light, we don't open the door and run up to the car in front of us to thank them for being so considerate as to follow the basic rules of the road and stop for the red light. It's simply a given that everybody does that. No thanks are required. Thanking people for doing something implies they had a choice to do otherwise and did so out of a desire to be nice. But imagine a world where feeding another person is as much an automatic response as stopping at a red light. A world where a person who fails to feed or care for another is ostracized or punished, the way we give people tickets when they run red lights, where the care of others is more important than even the care of yourself, where the teaching all things that you should want others to do to you, do ye even so unto them, is actually practiced, not out of an effort, but as part of a daily routine, as the normal way things are, as the basic assumption of a society. That is San culture, the way of an older culture. A story of Chippewa, a storyteller of Chippewa and Cree ancestry told me that his people have a belief that if a person visits your home and you fail to share with them food and water so that they leave hungry or thirsty, and then the Creator decides to take them home at that time, they will arrive in the spirit world hungry and thirsty. He said the responsibility for that person's condition in the world is yours, because you were the last person he met and you had an opportunity to feed him. So we have an obligation to feed and give water and shelter and whatever else a person may need whenever they come into our village or our home. In our younger culture, we value productivity and individual possession. In their older culture, they value community. Most modern people find it difficult or impossible to imagine a world where community is more important than possessions. Yet this is how about 1% of the world's population still lives, and how all of your and my ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years. In 1997, a group of 13 researchers released a study in which they quantified the value of all the environments on the planet, from measuring the size of the Louisiana shrimp harvest to how much people were willing to pay for access to a lake, coral reef, or other natural attraction. They concluded that the planet's natural areas were worth about $33 trillion. And then from there, I go on to talk about how that's a crazy way to value anything. And we need to be, revisiting these ancient culture values. The book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
President-elect Trump's pick of
with you and Scott Pruitt. Scott Pruitt is Trump wants to put in charge. King Donald wants to put Scott Pruitt in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. And this morning he gave a little talk to the reporters and the press about how we need to do away with regulations. That he had a meeting with a bunch of CEOs. By the way, the definition of fascism is the merger of state and business interests. He had a meeting with a group of CEOs, asked them what he should do. Is it more important to cut your corporate tax rate, or is it more important to do away with your regulations? They said, we got the corporate tax thing under control. There's a million loopholes. Don't worry, we've got that. But get rid of the regulations. Now, where is this stuff coming from? Scott Pruitt has a really, really interesting history. Back a few months back, Leo DiCaprio asked me if I would come to Toronto, and on stage with him and Fisher Stevens moderate a conversation between the two of them about Leo's most recent movie. It's called Before the Flood. And I know you can find it at the National Geographic Channel. I'm guessing you can find it at other places if you look around for it. It's a brilliant hour-long documentary on climate change in which he specifically calls out politicians by name, including Jim Inhofe and others, and shows how much money they got from which fossil fuel company. It's amazing. An amazing. He talks to President Obama. He talks to the Pope. Blah, 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 blah. And Fisher Stevens made the movie along with Leonardo. And I was honored to be there and hang out with these guys, for the weekend. And then Fisher Stevens made a new movie. And it's about Scott Pruitt. It's a little 4.5-minute documentary. You can find it on YouTube. And he's not on screen in this one. Well, he's not on screen in Before the Flood either. That's Leonardo who's on screen. But it's basically, a commentary, a narrative of who is Scott Pruitt. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? And I just wanted to share some pieces of Fisher Stevens' brilliant filmmaking or documentary making, apropos and specifically about the guy that King Donald wants to put in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. So the thing runs 4 minutes long. I'm going to interrupt it from time to time and just kind of riff on things. But here's how it starts.
President-elect Trump's pick of Scott Pruitt to head the EPA.
I'm Scott Pruitt.
Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt has been nominated by Donald Trump to serve as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency.
A leading critic of the EPA.
If confirmed, Pruitt will be put in charge of an agency he spent most of his legal career obstructing.
This agency called the EPA.
That's
Scott
Pruitt.
What is their role? What is their objective?
The EPA was established in 1972 by President Nixon.
Maintaining and improving environmental quality.
Protect against water pollution, air pollution,
pesticide hazard,
contamination of the environment.
So what makes Scott Pruitt an ideal candidate to protect the environment?
That's a good question.
According to the Natural Resources Defense Council, there's literally nothing in his record showing any indication of protecting the environment in any way that matters.
Greetings from the Oklahoma Attorney General's office.
Shortly after becoming Attorney General in 2011, Pruitt eliminated his office's Environmental Protection Unit, which investigated issues like water contamination and illegal dumping.
Now, pause that for a second, Chris. Just consider this. Scott Pruitt was the Attorney General for Oklahoma, or his chief law enforcement officer. And shortly after he was appointed to that position, he shut down the office where if the chemical factory up the road was, contaminating your well or running poisons into the stream that your kids play in or the river that you fish out of or that your city's water comes out of, you would call them up and report them. Now, who do you call in Oklahoma? Nobody. And this is the guy, he eliminated the Oklahoma equivalent of the EPA, eliminated it. And Donald Trump wants to put him in charge of our EPA for our entire nation. It continues.
That worked to overturn national safeguards to reduce dangerous air and water pollutants.
He has fought regulations that he would be required by law to enforce.
Attorney General Pruitt has great qualifications.
Supporters of Pruitt highlight his hostility toward the EPA as his primary qualification for the job, and very rarely mention that many of his actions reveal a clear pattern of unethical behavior. A New York Times investigation revealed that Pruitt had taken a letter written by lobbyists working on behalf of Devon Energy, copied it onto state government stationery, and sent it to Washington under his own signature.
Signed it and sent it off to the federal agency. He was basically working in alliance with these companies.
They thanked him for his outstanding work. 2 days before writing the letter, Devon Energy donated $125,000 to RAGA, the Republican Attorneys General Association, which he was an executive of. In 2013, employees at Oklahoma Gas and Electric held a fundraiser for Pruitt. 6 days later, Pruitt filed a lawsuit against the EPA in an effort to block a rule that the company opposed. In 2014, Pruitt joined an organization chaired by Harold Hamm, the CEO of oil and gas company Continental Resources.
Energy tycoon Harold Hamm led Pruitt's re-election committee.
Together, they sued the U.S. Department of Interior. 2 weeks later, Continental Resources donated $25,000 to RAGA. In 2016, ExxonMobil made a donation of $50,000 to Raga, and a month later, Pruitt wrote an op-ed defending Exxon, which was under investigation for deliberately misleading its investors and the public about the dangers of climate change.
I'll just pause that there, Chris. Again, here we have Scott Pruitt doing, just nakedly doing the bidding of polluting industries, and they are giving him money. Or they're giving money to the Republican Governors Association that he's an executive of. They're giving money to organizations associated with him or to campaign things or to PACs or whatever it may be. This used to be called bribery. This used to be called corruption. Don Siegelman has spent 7 years in prison, and he never even took a penny from anybody. It's that he was prosecuted for. He's in jail because he supported a lottery. Arguably he's in jail because he appointed a guy to a hospital commission who the previous Republican governor had appointed the same guy to the same commission that has no pay or oversight. And that guy had donated $500,000 to an organization that was promoting a state lottery. And of course, Jack Abramoff and his buddies were opposed to that. And it just got all sticky and messy and, whatnot with. But the bottom line is Don Siegelman's in jail for nothing compared to this. But the fact of the matter is that in 2010, this all got legalized by the Supreme Court. And so now owning a politician like Scott Pruitt is perfectly legal. And all these companies, this is just a list of the companies that own Scott Pruitt. And King Donald wants to make him the head of the EPA here. The video continues.
Has described this type of behavior as representative government, but it's clear he's only representing the interests of energy companies.
The oil and gas industry is applauding the selection of Scott Pruitt.
13 of the 14 lawsuits Pruitt filed against the EPA were co-filed with companies that gave financial contributions to his campaign or affiliated campaign committees.
He is suing the EPA.
Pruitt sued over regulations designed to reduce ozone, better known as smog. Despite the fact that the American Lung Association has described ozone as one of the most dangerous pollutants in the United States, and in a recent report gave all Oklahoma counties surveyed an F for ozone problems. In another case, Pruitt sued to block a rule restricting the amount of mercury that could be dumped into the air by coal power plants, despite overwhelming evidence that mercury is a dangerous neurotoxin, particularly for children. Pruitt sued the agency twice over these restrictions. Pruitt has even sued the EPA over safeguards for more than half of the nation's waterways, including streams that feed into drinking water supplies of 117 million Americans.
My state's prerogative to craft regulations that make sense for Oklahoma.
He currently has several pending lawsuits against the EPA that haven't even been heard in court yet, attacking regulations to reduce methane pollution from the oil and gas industry and the agency's Clean Power Plan, intended to reduce carbon pollution and slow the impacts of climate change.
We don't want the Environmental Protection Agency to be run by someone owned and controlled by the oil and gas industry.
This is sort of like putting an arsonist in charge of fighting fires.
He is going to try to bring the EPA to its knees.
Scared to death what'll happen if Pruitt's director of the EPA. Where are we in history when that happens?
Yeah, there you go. And it says reject polluting Pruitt, the hashtag polluting Pruitt, and puts up a phone number and all that kind of thing. And as I said, you can find this on YouTube. Fisher Stevens put it together, and courtesy Fisher Stevens, thank you very much for that. So, there are some nominees that, in fact, frankly, most of them, I mean, you want to give deference to a new president and say, yeah, okay, he gets to pick the people that he works with. I mean, there's not a lot you can do, but this guy really crosses the line. In my opinion, arguably one of the most corrupt public officials in the United States, at least with regard to things like pollution, mercury, arsenic, all this kind of stuff. They're going to put him in charge of the EPA? Really?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is something really worth this, calling your two senators, every one of us has one, 202-225-3121, and saying no on Scott Pruitt. And welcome back. Let's see here. Rita, watching Free Speech TV in Chipley, Florida. Hey, Rita, what's on your mind today?
Two things, Tom. I want to know when
King Cheeto takes away our health care, who do I have the hospital send the bills to?
Presumably the mortuary. I mean,
that's about it.
It's not that,
and
yeah.
also with Pruitt.
Or your children.
With Pruitt, when he takes all the things off, I want to know where to go to get a gas mask.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no doubt they'll sell them on Amazon, and Jeff Bezos will make a lot of money.
Yeah, but poor people can't afford it.
I'm guessing there will be cheap ones made in China that don't work very well, but yeah, but but it'll make people feel better. I realize, Rita, there's a certain I'm joking in a way about this, but it's serious. This is serious stuff. It's
scary.
Yes, it is. It goes beyond scary.
It's 5 years old.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? I live on Social Security. You cut my Social Security and everything else, I'm dead.
Yep. You and a lot of other people.
Millions of other people.
And this is why.
If I die, my blood is on his hands.
Amen. And this is why we need to be standing up. This is why we need to be speaking out. This is why we need to be joining outside organizations, protest organizations, movement organizations, and we need to be joining the Democratic Party and getting inside it and running for public office and becoming precinct committee people and choosing the people who are going to run so that they can give the Democratic Party the spine that it has lacked for 25 years. I'm with you, Rita. Rita, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, thanks for watching YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about the president electoral because I always want to highlight that he was picked by the electors, not by the people. I never want to hear him ever say that word, that he was elected by the people.
Right.
But I didn't watch his speech because I'm trying to boycott all of Trump's speeches. So I just listened to some transcripts of it. And apparently, from what I've heard, there was a lot of rich people there, a lot of wealthy people. And did you hear recently about Trump's new trade deal he's pushing with Great Britain?
He wants to negotiate one, and in fact, Michael pointed that out as in the first segment. The problem that he's going to have with that is that Great Britain has to first disentangle them. I believe, according to BBC, I heard a discussion about this last night. I listen to BBC every night to put myself to sleep, and there was a whole conversation about this. And apparently, the way the laws are organized in the UK, he can't do that until the BBC finishes the Brexit, until they formally pull out of the EU. And that's going to take another year and a half, 2 years. So
how can he be so brazen? He just ran against TPP and trade deals. Now he's pushing for a trade deal with Great Britain.
Right.
How stupid are his voters? And I keep telling them this, and I point out the South Korea trade deal that you
Well, Jared, there's actually, if you're trading with a country that is as rich as you are, and Great Britain on a per capita basis kind of largely is, and wants to have similar wage levels and things, that's not such a bad thing as trading with a country where labor costs 30 cents an hour. Jared, I got to run. Thanks for the call.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So this, there is an awful lot within the whole Trump thing that has to do with it being part of the whole Republican thing to be horrified by. Scott Pruitt is at the top of the list, in my opinion, of the basket of deplorables. Somebody who basically has been a corporate sellout in the guise of being a statesman or a politician or a political actor on behalf of we the people, when in fact he's been according to what I'm seeing, from the record that I'm seeing from this great video that Fisher Stevens put together, he's actually working on behalf of them, the corporations. And Donald Trump this morning, he had this meeting, right? Let's bring in industry. Well, where were the unions? They were missing. Oh, that's right. Republicans don't like unions. So whatever Trump may do, whatever Trump may say, we have to keep in mind that he's doing and saying it with the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is the political arm of the billionaire class and the big transnational corporations. So the delicate dance that they're doing is, how can we make Americans think, and maybe even bring back some jobs, maybe even, rebuild some places in the country, make it look a little better, right? How can we make people think that we're actually working on their behalf? Reagan was a master at this. He had people who had been reliable Democratic voters for years and years and years, for generations, voting for him because he convinced them that by giving tax breaks to billionaires and dropping the top tax rate, that he was actually going to stimulate the economy. Well, it didn't stimulate the economy. It caused the greatest crash since the Great Depression. But he didn't point that out. In fact, nobody pointed that out. Instead, Reagan also massively increased federal spending, tripled the national debt, and in the process stimulated the economy. And then said that the stimulus to the economy wasn't the result of Reagan's massive government spending or his massive increase in the size of government and programs, support programs, Star Wars, all this kind of stuff. He said, oh, that's not what stimulated the economy. What stimulated the economy was we dropped the top tax rate from 74% down to 28%. Well, in fact, that actually hurt the economy. And it certainly hurt average working people, and it continues to this day. So here's Donald Trump giving this speech about how, the establishment is his inaugural address. The establishment isn't going to run this country anymore. While in the bleacher right behind him, the Republicans had a certain number of VIP seats, and they went to a bunch of billionaires. And Bernie Sanders pointed this out. I mean, how can he rail against the establishment when the establishment is literally standing behind him? Literally. The Republican Party, funded by billionaires. It was actually founded as a progressive party in 1856, but it became, the modern Republican Party by the 1870s, 1880s, and has been basically, outside of this one little aberrant period of time with William Howard Taft and Teddy Roosevelt, a couple of more or less progressives, Roosevelt more than Taft. But outside of that, the Republican Party has been the party of billionaires and big business forever. And so, they want to cut regulation. They want to make it so that it's easier to poison people and make a big profit doing it. Scott Pruitt suing the EPA over mercury regulations. Now, there's nobody disputing that mercury is a neurotoxin. Mercury is poisonous to nerve cells. And, getting mercury into the bodies and brains of growing children, we know, it's well documented the damage that this causes. It's arsenic. It's not only a poison, it's also a carcinogen. And very, very low levels of arsenic, if it's sustained exposure over a long period of time, like it's in your drinking water, arsenic will cause cancer. The EPA has rules that say to big corporations, you cannot emit over a certain amount of mercury and over a certain amount of arsenic. Frankly, I think those rules are way too lax. Scott Pruitt is suing to end those rules altogether. A little mercury won't hurt you. They used to use it to treat syphilis back in the 1600s. Well, they did, yeah. And it killed people then, too. It is insane. It is insane. Remember the 6th of November of 2018. There's an election coming in a little less than 2 years. Are you getting ready? I think the backlash that we saw, the revolution began on Saturday. The backlash that we saw, the taking back of this country from the Republican machine, is going to be something to behold if you get involved.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after the break at the bottom of the hour. Paul Krugman says that, yes, the white working class is about to be betrayed. The evidence of that coming betrayal is obvious in the choice of an array of pro-corporate, anti-labor figures for particular positions, key positions. In particular, the most important story of the week, seriously, people, stop focusing on Trump's Twitter, was the selection of Tom Price, an ardent opponent of Obamacare and advocate of Medicare privatization, as Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services. This choice probably means that the Affordable Care Act is doomed, and Mr. Trump's most enthusiastic supporters will be among the biggest losers. Yes. And then he says, the first thing you need to understand here is that Republican talk of repeal and replace has always been a fraud. The GOP has had 6 years claiming it'll come up with a replacement for Obamacare any day now. The reason why it hasn't delivered is because it can't. Now, let me add to this. The reason why the Republicans have not been able to offer an alternative to Obamacare is because Obamacare was the original Republican plan. This is what Richard Nixon proposed in 1972, back when we had real news in the United States. And Teddy Kennedy fought. And then the Heritage Foundation in the early 1980s, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, I believe it was, came out with a working paper on this and said, here's how to do it. Mitt Romney tried it in Massachusetts, and it was relatively successful. He tried it in 2000. He ran for president on it in 2004, or he intended to. By that time, though, Obamacare had passed, and it had become radioactive, and so he was trying to, oh, no, I didn't do that, but he did. I mean, that's the Republican program. The Democratic program is Medicare. Give Medicare to everybody. But the Democratic program couldn't get through, given the current Congress we had. So this is what President Obama put together, was basically the Republican program. Speaking of when we actually had news in this country, have you heard anybody breaking down any of these pieces of legislation lately? Back in 1972, when Richard Nixon proposed Obamacare, Daniel Shore went on CBS News. Daniel Shore has since passed away. Lamar and I had a wonderful lunch with him here in Washington, D.C. back, 20 years ago when we were writing our first book on the JFK assassination. Daniel Shore had some fascinating information for us. What an amazing guy and a great journalist. But this is how journalism used to be done in the United States. This is a clip from CBS back from the day. You can find this floating around YouTube. Here it is.
The administration proposal would provide different plans for 4 categories of Americans. For 150 million working people and their families, employers would be required to buy health insurance providing a basic package of benefits, eventually they paying 3/4 of the premiums.
This is number
For some
one.
20 million of the working poor and their families, the current free Medicaid services would be replaced by private health insurance fully paid by the government for the poorest, with a sliding scale of contributions for families earning more than $3,000.
That's number two, the second part of it.
For the 21 million aging Americans, the $5.60 monthly Medicare premium for optional doctor services would be dropped. Social Security taxes adjusted to make up the cost.
That's part 3.
For some 30 million domestic, self-employed, and others, lower costs by being enabled to buy policies at group rates from insurance pools.
Sound like Obamacare?
Deductions, co-insurance features. The plan is estimated to cover less than half of the average patient's health expenses and to cost the federal government less than $2 billion in addition to what it's now paying. By contrast, the Kennedy plan would cover an estimated 70% of health expenses through a system that would cost the government up to $60 billion, but including a lot of what patients are now paying. The Kennedy bill is straight national health insurance, financed by Social Security
the Kennedy
and
bill
general
was single-payer
taxes,
health insurance.
with no cost sharing, no cutoff point for the beneficiaries. bypassing private insurance companies operating through a presidentially appointed health security board. And so the line is being drawn between repairs on the present health system and a new federal health system. The debate starts next Monday, when Welfare Secretary Richardson is scheduled to appear at the opening of hearings of the Senate Health Subcommittee. The chairman of that subcommittee now, Senator Kennedy.
There you go. And then he goes to Kennedy and he gives a speech. And there's another one out there too where Walter Cronkite is breaking the thing down. I mean, there's a couple of them where they're breaking it down because that's what news used to do. And then in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, keep in mind this was 72, and then in the 1980s during the Reagan administration, whenever any news media came out and said, hey, yeah, Ronald Reagan just lied to you. You know, these are not facts. Things like that, then you had this whole media infrastructure that was funded by these very, very wealthy families, by the Coors family and by the Bradley Foundation, the Bradley family. And, a lot of them now, they're just foundations because the founders are dead, but they were live, live and kicking back then. And they were funding groups like, Brent Bozell's group, which I think was ACT, something like that, Accuracy in Media, AIM, A-I-M. And they would just yell and scream, oh, my God, Daniel Shore, he's CEO, how dare he, blah, 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 blah. And this was a strategy that was called working the refs. You work the referees. You hassle the referees to the point where they just finally give in and say, oh, all right already. And that's what our media did, is they said, all right already. We're tired of fighting with you right-wingers about what's factual and what's not. We'll just stop talking about facts. Remember, I was telling you an hour ago that Trump's trade policies are going to put him at odds with the Republican Party. And this is going to be a very interesting thing to watch. And in particular, the thing to watch is the sleight of hand that I'm predicting the Republicans, Reince Priebus is going to try to negotiate something where the Republicans can save face and still have their free trade deals, and their corporations can still move jobs overseas and stash money overseas. And Donald Trump can say to voters in urban Ohio, hey, I saved some jobs, or suburban Ohio, or wherever it may be, rural Ohio. But here, this is, so this morning, Trump signed this thing saying, no, the TPP, from the American point of view, the TPP is dead. And John McCain, quote, called it this is from an article in The Hill today, called it a serious mistake that will have lasting consequences for America's economy and our strategic position in the Asia-Pacific region. It will create an opening for China to rewrite the economic rules of the road at the expense of American workers, McCain said in a statement, and it will send a troubling signal of American disengagement in the Asia-Pacific region at a time we can least afford it. Now, that's the institutional Republican response. For the institutional Democratic response, Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, I am glad the Trans-Pacific Partnership is dead and gone. Now is the time to develop a new trade policy that helps working families, not just multinational corporations. If Bernie is more respectful. If President Trump is serious about a new policy to help American workers, then I would be delighted to work with him. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating. Kyle in Enid, Oklahoma. Hey, Kyle, what's on your mind?
Well, I heard you talk about Scott Price and
Scott Pruitt.
And Pruitt. And one of the things I wish the senators would have, maybe they didn't have time, but when he made some comment, I'm paraphrasing, that the oil companies speak for Oklahomans, speak for the people of Oklahoma, something of that nature.
Right.
And I would love for the senator to have asked him, if that's the case, then when we're having 500 to 1,000 earthquakes a year, our homes are being torn apart simply because of saltwater injection. That's all it is.
Right, part of fracking.
No, not fracking, saltwater injection. And fracking had nothing to do with it, but
that salt water is the wastewater from the fracking process, is it not?
No. It's the wastewater from the oil that's coming up out of the ground. Oil comes up with the water. They separate it and turn around and pump it back down. But see, with the vertical wells, the horizontal wells, they're producing probably 50 times more salt water than they ever produced with verticals. Right. They're drilling 4 wells out of one location, and the salt water is just tremendous. And they're shoving it down at such high pressure that it just can't absorb it. Right. And that's what's causing the earthquake. So anyway, I have written checks for $6,000 on my house on broken water mains and ceiling beams falling in, and that doesn't count damages to the floors and buckling and that kind of stuff. And this is all over the state,
right?
And they actually suppressed it.
Yeah, and there's not an agency any longer in the state of Oklahoma that you can call and say, you know, I'm being harmed by a company's behavior.
They don't care. And this is the same guy that stood up there and said that the oil companies speak for the people of Oklahoma. I wish he would. I would love to send him some pictures and just let him hold these up and say, are you saying that you're speaking for the oil companies who are speaking for the people of Oklahoma who have all these millions of dollars of damages to these homes and can't do anything about it?
Right. I'm curious, Kyle, what's happened with your homeowner's insurance in the face of this? Are the insurance companies getting wise?
It's been moving around. Mine is I did go ahead and take it, but the deductibles are 10%. If you got a $300,000 home, it gets to be where it almost has to be in a pile.
So you got a $30,000 deductible basically on your homeowner's insurance.
Exactly. It just all comes out of your pocket.
Yeah.
So far. Now, we haven't had the big one yet. 5's as big as we've had.
Right.
But when you have, it's easy to Google. We've had as close to 1,000 of these in a year. Now, they're not all 5's, a bunch of them.
Right, and this is a state that until they started serious fracking there and they've been drilling for oil in Oklahoma forever. But I guess vertically. But since they started this horizontal drilling, which is called fracking. Since they started that, and then started injecting, as you say, the salt water into and I understand they're also injecting the fracking wastewater as well.
That's relatively small volume compared to the
salt water.
Millions of gallons.
That's fine. I believe you, Kyle. But
they brought in, the state geologist was brought into David Boren's office, the president of Oklahoma University, and sat down with he and Harold Hamm, and they read him the Riot Act. Mm-hmm. That you are not to say anything about this. It finally got so bad they had to, but they stopped. They literally stopped the state geologist from even mentioning it in public. He almost got run off over it at first, and then it got so bad they had to address it. But Scott Pruitt's neck deep in this.
Yep.
He doesn't work for anybody. You nailed it. He works for the oil companies, period.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to get. This is what the people of the United States are going to get. And the state of Oklahoma has been run straight into the ground by Fallon and the Republican Congress. They're doing it in Kansas, and Kansas doesn't hold a candle to what they're doing here. They broke the state. $1.2 billion deficit last year, $875 million projected this year. The lowest paid teachers in the country. They have nowhere to cut. They've cut everything to the bone, and we still have these projections. And what are they discussing now? More tax cuts. Can you believe this? They want more tax cuts. They've lost their mind, and this is a preview. This is a preview of coming attractions for this country. I guarantee it.
Yep, and that's my point. That's why I wanted to play that Scott Pruitt video. It's like this is serious stuff. You know, there are some very, very dangerous policies being advanced by this administration and by the Republican Party historically, and as you point out correctly, at the state level. I mean, Kansas has been broken, Wisconsin has been broken. Oklahoma, I did not realize how bad the situation was there, but Kyle, you live there, so I'm trusting trusting your word.
Nobody cares about us, but someone should research. They need to do in-depth research before the next hearings with this Scott Pruitt and go to Oklahoma and interview some people and see what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Because it's just hold up pictures in the hearing and say, Mr. Pruitt, if you speak, or if the oil companies speak for the state of, or for the citizens of Oklahoma, why are they doing this to their homes?
Right.
I literally had a huge beam just cave in my living room.
Oh my.
Yeah, it just caved in
From the
to
earthquakes.
Kill somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And cracks. I mean, and this is not just old houses. This is new houses. This is all types of houses.
No, of course. Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma didn't used to have earthquakes, and so the building codes, obviously are not like San Francisco's. I mean, it's a whole different thing. Kyle, I got to move along, but thank you for the call and thanks for sharing your experience from Oklahoma with us. Your experience of Scott Pruitt's world. Stan in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Stan, what's on your mind?
Oh yeah, I've been watching your show for quite a long time, and I finally decided to call today. And see, when I was a sophomore in college, I worked a lot on the Jimmy Carter, trying to get him elected.
Mm-hmm. In
'76,
you mean?
We carried Tampa, and Florida won the election.
Yeah.
And do you think the 1980 election was stolen?
Oh, yeah. Google President Bonnie Sauter, BANI-SADR, and Christian Science Monitor. The Christian Science Monitor did an interview with him a couple of years ago about the movie Argo. Actually, plug the word Argo, A-R-G-O, into your Google search, and it'll pop right up. It'll be at the top of the list.
Oh.
And the former president of Iran, pointed out to the Christian Science Monitor that this is 1980, during the election, while Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan are fighting against each other, right? During that time, going up to November, this was in August, before November. In August, Bonnie Sauter runs for president of Iran on the platform of freeing the hostages. And he wins with 79% of the vote. The vast majority of the Iranian people wanted the hostages freed. They didn't want to get in a fight with the United States. So he goes to the Ayatollah and he says, okay, I'm president now, and I'm going to free the hostages. And the Ayatollah said to him, and he tells this story, the Christian Science Monitor, it's right there. You can read it in black and white. And the Ayatollah says to him, no, we're not going to release the hostages because we made a deal with with the Reagan campaign that we would hold the hostages until Ronald Reagan is elected president. And in exchange for that, they would sell us spare parts for the American-made military equipment that we have, because under the Shah, we had supplied their military. So they had American jets, American tanks, American missiles, and they needed spare parts and they needed weaponry. And that became Iran-Contra. I mean, we sold them those weapons for 6 years. We were selling weapons to the Iranians illegally. Finally got busted for it, and Reagan then was using that money to run guns down to Central America for the Contras, to kill communists and to bring cocaine back up into the United States that ended up in our inner cities. I mean, it was obscene what happened under Ronald Reagan, but it's no secret that there has not been a legitimately elected Republican president of the United States since Dwight Eisenhower. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I could go through the whole long list and explain exactly why each one of these guys basically stole an election. Stan, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Oh, and we're going to check in with Talk Media News, too. Welcome back. Let's see here. Laura, watching Free Speech TV on, well, it doesn't say where, but anyhow, in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Yes, hi there, Tom. I just wanted to please ask you not to refer to him as King Donald. And the reason that is because words have power, even jokingly. Remember, this election demonstrated the power of words in the minds of people who are unable to think freely for themselves. And my number one reason is that he's a narcissist, and he is going to see it as a compliment, and he loves it. And number two, it could serve to solidify him as disrespecting the Constitution, because we know he loves Putin, and he's been in office for how many years? And he is the richest man in the world, and Trump wants to emulate him. And then third, it plays right into doublespeak. When you have Bannon, Lutz, Gingrich, these people see hypocrisy they wear it like a badge of honor. They say, well, don't do what I say or do what I do. Do what I say. Their words are powerful because they are in conflict with reality and the truth, and they have perfected this. So I think calling him King Donald could play right into their doublespeak ploy and backfire on us.
Yeah, I don't think so, Laura. I really don't think so. I think that it points out that he doesn't understand the Constitution. He doesn't understand how our government works. He has been talking all throughout the campaign as if he was king. He's been the CEO his entire life, which in America is essentially being king. And now he's putting gold curtains in the White House, and soon to come gilded everything. I'm see him as Louis the 16th. Being a king doesn't always work out well.
Remember, lawmakers make laws, though, and they're in the power to get rid of any laws that say they have to respect the Constitution. Who's to say they won't change the laws to the degree that he never has to leave office?
Yeah, just because I call him King Donald doesn't mean he's going to become king. He just thinks.
In the minds of people who hear that, it could very well mean that. Yeah. I'm just saying.
I understand. I understand, Laura, and let me chew on what you had to say. Let me think about it. Thanks a lot for the call. Israel in Playa del Rey, California. Hey, Israel, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you been?
Good. We got a minute to the break.
Okay, Tom, I want to be quick, but I really do. Tom, I love you, and I've been listening to you for years. But I do have a problem, as Laura did just now, which you so eloquently put out. You can't be calling this guy king. Please, don't do this to us. Every time you say it, it's like it's a spear going through my heart.
Yeah.
You got to stop. This is really... I know weak-minded people, and she's right. This is going to affect the minds of progressives so much. They're going to start bowing to him. They're going to start. Everyone is listening to you, Tom, and everyone's depending on you to be the center of rebellion or some sort of help for us. And you're calling this guy king, and it's like you can't do this to us. You got to stop. It's a joke, but I understand. But Laura is way more intelligent than I am. You go back and listen to her call.
Yeah.
It's really affecting people, and it's affecting
So
me.
What would you suggest, Israel?
Huh?
What would you suggest?
The guy in the White House. Trump.
Yeah, the guy in the White House. There you go. Yeah, I could call him Donald Trump, I suppose. Israel, thanks for the call. Thought-provoking conversation. What do you think? Is it appropriate to call Donald Trump King Donald? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News today, find out what's going on in the world. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. On the line with us, Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Hey, Luke, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. What's going on in the world today?
Terrific. Well, my eye is a little further away from the U.S. We'll get back to Washington in just a moment, but we began the day with some pretty interesting reports coming out of Russia from their Ministry of Defense stating that over the weekend, the Russian military based in Syria for the moment, that sort of forward element of the military that's assisting there, had been contacted by the United States and given the coordinates of Islamic State targets within Syria. And then the Russian, according to this Ministry of Defense statement, the Russians then deployed drones to go verify this info. It was accurate, and then they called in actual airstrikes involving Russian and perhaps Turkish jets. This was reported by the AP.
So the Trump administration has started cooperating with Russia against ISIS.
Yes, the AP.
Why?
Story that ran, go ahead.
Luke? Why didn't the Obama administration do the same thing?
For a number of reasons. I mean, the United States previously had been trying to say, look, our number one priority is to fight terrorism here, but we have this secondary priority when it comes to activities in Syria, which is to not do anything that would have benefited the Assad government. And so the U.S. sort of allowed Russia and their partners to do anti-ISIL operations in one part of the country. We didn't have any role in them because it was too close to Assad territory, and we were handling the anti-Islamic State campaign in the eastern part of the country. But, it began with Mr. Trump's inaugural speech on Friday, in which he said basically, we're going to go back to our old alliances, we'll build new alliances, and we're going to join together a grander coalition, basically, to wipe radical Islamic terrorism off the face of the earth. Now, putting aside the fact that that is impossible to do, it is a very clear signal that he seems willing to pull in more countries into this Operation Inherent Resolve against the Islamic State than President Obama was willing to. So this is a pretty historic moment where if you take this as correct, and we've gotten sort of mixed messages from the Pentagon today, there is a level of cooperation now between the U.S. and Russia in Syria, and that's a huge shift from the past administration.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it is. That is a big shift. What else is going on?
Well, just before we get off that, I will say last week you had the Turks and the Russians also working together, which just signals how much the battle lines in this conflict have changed.
Right, and Turkey is a NATO. They're a member of NATO, are they not?
Sure. I mean, and a year ago, those two countries, were withdrawing their ambassadors because of a plane being shot down. So it's amazing that their relationship has come as far as it has in a year as well. So really, we're looking at a pretty titanic shift in Syria policy to start off this administration. We're shifting back to Washington. You have seen President Obama issue several executive orders today. The one I'm sure you've talked about a little is the withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. Right. And we know the president has set up meetings for the coming week with Justin Trudeau in Canada, which is usually the first visit of any president. And then later this week, we'll host Theresa May from the United Kingdom. And their hope, at least within the Trump administration, is to start figuring out what a free trade deal would look like with Great Britain, which is interesting because if you listen to some of the rhetoric coming from the White House, they make it seem like that's going to be on the table right away. But they forget that under the terms of Brexit, the UK cannot sign any new trade agreements until it is fully out of the European Union.
Which is going to take 2 years.
Still more than 2 years away. So it's sort of wishful thinking, I think, on people's parts that, we're going to put TPP down and our priority will shift to a free trade deal with Great Britain. I mean, that is going to be a long time coming. And I think, judging by the unrest in the currency markets today, which are still just not, and, sort of investors more broadly do not feel they have enough details from the president about his stimulus policies. I don't think they should be comforted on trade either. A NAFTA renegotiation will take years. A free trade deal with Britain it just cannot legally happen for a period of years either. So this is a robust strategy, as the White House is calling it, but it leaves very little that can actually be done sort of in the short term. I think these are really long-term policies. They're going to require thousands of lawyers. It is worth pointing out. I mean, we know this is sort of one of the least staffed administrations in U.S. history. Yeah. These free trade deals take thousands. Sometimes.
What if, I mean, we're part of the WTO. England, the United Kingdom is part of the WTO. What if Trump just said, we're going to give you some kind of special treatment that I can do by executive order, and we're going to call that a free trade deal? I mean, it's like I think the point that they're making is that when you have a so-called free trade deal with a country that basically has the same standard of living as you do, then you're probably not going to have a drainage of jobs. Instead, what you're going to be getting are things imported and exported that are just simply not the natural products of those countries. We're back to David Ricardo and the theory of comparative advantage.
Sure.
And the comparative advantage isn't that we have 30-cent an hour labor. So it seems like there's probably a dozen different ways that he could cut some sort of deal with England that would just, make it look like it was a free trade agreement. But in fact, it's just, hey, let's just resolve to do more business with each other and, something like that.
Yeah, that may well be. I think the general point that just sort of still perplexes me, having traveled a lot to Asia and over the past years and heard about the excitement about TPP, is that agreement just touched such a huge portion of the American economy. And to say basically our trade agenda is about having priority number one be Great Britain, I mean, that's not working large to small. That's not really going to move the needle all that much.
Okay.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mochaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year. 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the Corporate Crime Reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives, or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin-producing or toxin-using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workmen's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mochaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control frantically tried to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States. Used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. The U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mochaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the deaths." This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Don't know if you've been following the ice in the Arctic, but this is a really, really, really big story. If you want to get the latest on it, arctic-news.blogspot.com is probably the best website for, just straightforward, here's the information. And we're seeing that the amount of ice that is formed during this winter in the Arctic so far is so far below the norms over the last 4 or 5 decades that it's literally falling off the chart. In other words, there's so little ice. Now, why does this matter? 2 reasons. Number one, underneath that ice, there are an estimated 1,500 billion tons of frozen methane, methane hydrates. These are this slurry of methane. It's like snow cone. And it's along the shallow floor of the Arctic Sea and around the continental edges. And that methane is being kept stable because the water is cold. And the pressure is reasonably high, but mostly because the water is cold. Now, what does this have to do with the sea ice? If you take a glass of water and you put ice cubes in it, along with water, and stick a thermometer in it, so that you're measuring the temperature at the center of the glass, right? You're measuring the actual water temperature right in, and then you set that glass of water, or pan, it could be a pan of water, actually. A glass of water would be a little more probably. Let's say a beaker, a Pyrex beaker. Set it on top of a Bunsen burner. Start heat it up, or put it on top of your stove and start heating it up very rapidly. Is the temperature of the water going to increase? No. The temperature of the water will stay at 32 degrees, at the freezing temperature of water, until all the ice melts. The first thing that happens is all that heat goes into melting the ice, and the water maintains a stable temperature of 32 degrees. This is, this is kind of physics class 101, but, if you never took the class, this is how it works. It's called phase change, right? Solid, liquid, gas. These are called the phases of a compound, in this case, of water. And when water is solid as ice, it has to be below 32 degrees, and so it will hold all of that heat will go into melting the ice. Now, minutes after the last ice cube melts, the water in that glass starts heating up really rapidly. Now, shift that from your glass with your Pyrex beaker with your water and ice in it into the Arctic Ocean, which is covered with ice, or was covered with ice. And now, giant areas of it no longer have any ice. And the ice that is growing in the winter, see, typically the ice grows in the winter, it recedes in the summer, but it doesn't recede that much. It used to be in the summer, you could walk across the ice to the North Pole. Well, you can't anymore. North Pole is now just water. In fact, a cruise ship went across the Arctic Ocean just a few months ago, at the end of the summer. And the big danger here is that if that methane gets heated up, we have, from the time of the Industrial Revolution until recently, we have burned around, the number I always used to use was 500 billion tons of carbon, but I think it's closer to, Troy, you've been researching this. Is it 800 billion tons, more or less? You're not, how much carbon have we burned since the 1850s into the atmosphere? But 555 gigatons? Okay, thank you. So we've burned about 555 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. And it has produced almost 2 degrees of warming. We're beyond 1 degree now, and we're heading toward 2, and it's unlikely anything's going to stop that. And if the last of that ice in the Arctic melts, so that the water then begins heating up beyond 32 degrees, it has the possibility of melting that methane, which represents 1,500 billion tons of carbon. Whether it goes into the atmosphere as methane, whether it gets converted to carbon dioxide by bacterial action or even chemical action, it's still carbon going into the atmosphere. Now, methane is far more, it's 80, 90, 100 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, although it only lasts about 20 years. But if you look at the major extinctions on Earth, all of them seem to have been, at their very worst, punctuated by a sudden pulse of methane into the atmosphere, because these methane hydrate crystals, these methane clathrate crystals, the frozen methane around the continental shelves all around the world has the sea has warmed up enough that methane warmed up that, boom, it goes into the atmosphere, and so you get this sudden 5-degree spike, 5 or even more degrees Celsius spike in temperature worldwide, which then produces, firestorms and massive extinctions. I mean, in the Permian, it was 97% of all life on Earth went extinct. It was hundreds of millions of years before anything larger than a mouse returned of any consequence. And now comes this story. This is from Science News, sciencenews.org. For 3 years in a row, Earth breaks heat record. It's by Thomas Sumner, published January 18th, 2017. For the third year running, Earth's thermostat broke a new record. 2016 was the warmest year since record-keeping began in 1880. Spurred by climate change and heat from a monster El Nino, the global average surface temperature last year was 0.94 degrees Celsius higher than the 20th century average. It's almost 1 degree. It's 1.69 degrees Fahrenheit. That slightly edges out the previous title holder, 2015. 8 months during 2016 set all-time highs, including July, which was Earth's warmest month on record. Scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and NASA reported January 18th. This is only the second time that the annual temperature record has been broken 3 years in a row. And the last time was 1939 through 1941, and it didn't even rank in the top 30 warmest eras. So it was just, kind of a coincidence. But if you look at the ice, the Arctic ice from 1978 to 2017, 2016 and 2017 are really, really, really scary lines. We're talking about the possibility of the extinction of life on Earth, including us. And yet this is a topic that our news media saw fit not to even bother with in any of the presidential debates. Never made its way into the dialogue outside of Bernie Sanders, frankly, talking about it pretty aggressively. This is an existential threat to the survival of the human race. Not just to cities on the coasts, not just to civilization, to literally the survival of the human race and everything larger than a mouse. We're talking a massive threat here. And Donald Trump wants to put Scott Pruitt, the guy who works for the oil industry, as the Attorney General for Oklahoma, wants to put him in charge of the EPA. I mean, it doesn't get any more bizarre than that. It doesn't get any more, frankly, dangerous than that. Now would be a really good time to call 202-225-3121 and say to your senators, particularly if they are Republicans, and say to your 2 senators, no, we do not want a shill for the oil company running the EPA. We don't want it. No. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
By the way, at 1 minute after noon on last Friday on inaugural day, the all mention of climate change vanished from the White House website. And welcome back. 15, 16, 17 minutes past the hour. Doug in Gastonia, North Carolina. Hey, Doug, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, well, thank you very much. First-time caller, and I just wanted to say that Dandy Don the Con works for me.
Okay. Don the Con.
You don't have to say Dandy, just call him Don the Con.
Yeah.
I sort of do agree with about the King thing. They do take things to heart. And as far as calling him Donald, that always bothered me. Even when Hillary would say Donald, it just gives him too much. It's too good of a name.
Too respectful.
For him, frankly.
Yeah.
And so
Okay, so
nerves
that's your vote. Doug, I'm still processing this. I'm taking this seriously, and I typically don't call people names at all. It's
Right.
sort of a limboism. But over the weekend, first of all, I was shocked when I saw that he had changed the drapes in the White House to gold, right? And it's like, what's next? And I was thinking, this is the boy king. This is Louis what, the 14th, I think, was the boy king, or who is this? Louis the.
I sure hope not.
I forget my Louis, but anyhow, Doug, thanks for weighing in. Jim in Palatka, Florida. Am I saying that right, Jim? Watching Free Speech?
It's Palatka.
Palatka, thank you.
Yeah.
So you wanted to weigh in on King Donald too?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch base on that King Donald thing. It does give him too much dignity, and it just feeds his oxygen.
Yeah.
I do something along the lines of like KD.
KD as in King Donald.
Yeah,
okay.
and you can do a number of different variations. I mean, first of all, we can change the K from King to Nut with a K, or Knucklehead. And then on the D side, I mean, I like the idea of Don as opposed to Donald. But what was his last name when his dad, before he changed it?
Trump.
Wasn't it Trump? Was it something with a D?
Yeah, I think it was DRUM.
Okay,
PF.
so we got. Anyway, I'd go with KD, but the long and the short of it is it gives him too much dignity, and it just feeds his oxygen.
Yeah. Okay, well, there seems to be a consensus forming around this. Jim, thanks for the call. Eleanor in South San Francisco, you wanted to weigh in on this? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me now?
It sounds like you're in the bottom of a tin can there,
Hold
Eleanor.
on, let me take you off of here just a moment.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, sounds great now.
Better. Okay. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
I want to weigh in on the King Donald thing. Let's all just calm down a little bit. We're all kind of in shock and stuff like that, but I'm going to say that I'm 73 years old. I've seen a lot of these little dog and pony shows before, so this is not really too different, but it's a little shocking. But people, get it together. Let's not get scared. Let's not freak out. Let's just I think if nothing else, on Saturday, that march showed you, if anything else, that there are a lot more people that feel the way you do. And as that result, we need to really mobilize more. And it's not just marches. It is calling your representatives every single day.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do.
Well, once a week. If you call every single day, Eleanor, they'll start ignoring you. But at least once a week, yeah, I'm with you. And pick a topic for the week. Eleanor, thank you for the call. And thanks for sharing your opinion with us. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Mary in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind?
Hello, this is my first time calling. I would like to chime in on the King Donald issue.
Okay.
During the campaign, I remember an interview with community members in a small village in Africa. They were very, very excited about the idea of America electing Donald Trump king.
Really?
Just couldn't wait for King Donald. And I think it's important to remember that there are a lot of people on the planet who have never experienced democracy and are only familiar with either royalty or
So you're also voting, Mary, against my using the phrase King Donald.
Well, I think combined with the cult of celebrity, I think it's something we need to guard against, him actually embracing that concept.
Well, I think he's already embraced it. That's why I was using the phrase. I believe that he thinks of himself as a king.
Family status. I'm sorry?
I think he thinks of himself as king of America. He's doing royal decrees and
as queen and princess and his lovely sons as princes. And I just don't think we ought to give him that.
Yeah. Okay. Mary, your vote is recorded. Thank you. Yeah. Catherine in Rohnert Park, California. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Hey, Catherine, you're on the air.
Oh, okay. Yes, I had two possible titles to give him. My preferred is Chief Civil Servant. That puts him in his proper place.
Mm-hmm.
And the second would be, I noticed a number of signs in the Women's March, Predator in Chief.
Yeah.
So they might serve well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm just not all that good at calling people names, and I never have been. And maybe this little trial balloon here was a mistake, and I should just go start calling him Donald Trump. But I get what you're saying, Catherine. Thank you for weighing in. Colin in Boise, Idaho. Hey, Colin, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to weigh in on the whole King Trump thing.
Hmm?
Yeah, he's our president and can't do much about it. Make America great again. Woo!
Yeah. Oh, that's all. That's what you meant to say? He was trying to troll me? Jeez, at least do it intelligently, would you? You know, say something worth saying. Rob in Junction City, Kansas. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, sir? I had some questions referenced this Women's March. Now, I'd like to juxtapose Donald Trump versus an actual sexual predator by the name of Bill Clinton. Now, this man spent his entire public career.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Tom in Livingston Manor, New York. It's great being trolled. Tom in Livingston Manor, New York. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Tom, don't you know that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and in the east tomorrow it's going to snow, so how can there possibly be global warming?
I have heard words to that effect. And
up here we call Donald Disgusting Donald.
Disgusting Donald. Well, that's
Disgusting Donald. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's because you're a New Yorker.
I think it should be President Trump with an asterisk, just like if any of those baseball players get into the Hall of Fame, they should have an asterisk beside their name. And I think that's the way he should be known as.
Yeah.
Because he is not a legitimate president.
Yeah. It's a good point. Tom, thanks a lot for the call. Rick in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, Rick, what's up?
I had a name for him. Just call him POTUS. He is. But that doesn't mean that he's president of America. You know, he's not the people's president of the Union of America anyway.
Yeah, I like the "Not My President" hashtag. I mean, I do not think of Donald Trump as my president.
He's the federal government.
But he is the president. But
he's the president of the federal government of the U.S.
I think
means, but not of America.
Yeah. Okay, Rick, thanks a lot for sharing. Harold, and I don't mean that sarcastically. Harold in Long Branch, New Jersey. Hey, Harold, what's on your mind?
I would just call him Lucky Don.
Lucky Don.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like Lucky Luciano.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Don the Con. I mean, you know, Don, good old Don. It's okay. Harold, thank you. Ryan in Nevada City, California. Hey, Ryan, what's on your mind?
Just wanted to talk about the inauguration day, and that I am basically doing my form of protesting. Well, since I'm snowed in, I can't get out. I watched Democracy Now! Pretty much the entire time. Never didn't watch the inauguration, and I noticed from clipping back and forth, not too much, that Democracy Now! Covered pretty much every thing that was going on outside, and nobody was talking about any of the relevant things. Like, for example, Black Lives Matter, they shut down that checkpoint with no violence. They just sat there and chained themselves. A few of them did. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't mentioned on any channel that I saw. If they did mention it, I wasn't watching, but I didn't see them mention it the next day. But also, I'm doing my part in I'm going on the internet, speaking to people who are ill-informed, and I'm, putting out videos on my Facebook, speaking out and trying to put facts into things that I say.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
And I'm going to call my congressman tomorrow. I heard basically on Democracy Now! They showed Michael Moore's speech that I missed the night before, and I wrote down the number. And I'm basically calling tomorrow because it's, I feel Tuesday would be an appropriate day. And I just figured I'd say all that, and I'm hoping other people will start doing their part instead of, sitting and complaining.
Yeah, well, sitting and complaining
there
is
are people who aren't acting,
yeah, and sitting and complaining is not all that useful, and frankly, I mean, I've always taken the position that name calling is not all that useful. So I think that I'm just going to refer to the guy in the White House as with his name, Donald Trump.
Well, I just call him Trump, honestly.
Yeah, well, the same thing. I mean, it's how Republicans referred to President Obama for 8 years. They just called him Obama. And so,
yeah, near the end of the year, I just started doing this Obama did it thing. Anything, my coffee fell over, I'm like, God, Obama.
Okay. Brian, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour. We're kind of done with the conversation about what we should name Trump. I'm done with it. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So are you concerned about the possibility of the extinction of the human race here as a consequence of climate change and the Trump administration? The Philippine war on drugs. Rodrigo Duterte launched a Filipino version of Richard Nixon's war on drugs. Now, you'll recall Richard Nixon's war on drugs, John Ehrlichman told us, the reason for it was that they wanted to bust up the hippies and they wanted to bust up the civil rights movement, essentially. And so they made heroin and pot super illegal. And whether they planted it on people or people were using it, they just went after that. Well, this war on drugs in the Philippines is now 7 weeks old. This is as of the 23rd, 3 days ago. 7 weeks old. 1,900 people have died. 1,900 people have died. Over 100,000 Mexicans have died just on our border in the Mexican war on drugs. Millions of Americans have had their lives ruined by the war on drugs in this country since Richard Nixon launched it in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Millions of people, and I would say probably between tens and hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result of the war on drugs. This is crazy. Portugal had the third highest drug addiction rate in Europe. Now that includes, Europe these days now includes a number of very, very, the former Soviet states that are very, very poor countries where they have, that are closer, that are farther south and east and closer to the principal source of heroin these days, opium, which is Afghanistan. And so there's, a couple of countries that had higher drug addiction rates, but among the developed countries of Europe, the so-called Western European nations, Western and Northern European nations, Portugal was number one in terms of drug addiction, and particularly heroin, and new infections of HIV and Hep C, which come along with, sharing needles. So Portugal decriminalized all drugs. They did the exact opposite of what the Philippines did 8 weeks ago, when their new president came in. They did the exact opposite. They decriminalized all drugs. And this was 14 years ago, in 2002. And now they have one of, if not the lowest, drug addiction rates in all of Western Europe, arguably probably all of Europe. And the rates of new HIV and Hep C infections have just collapsed. And organized crime in Portugal, at least that part of organized crime that was involved in the drug trade, it broke their back. They're destroyed. They're gone. Toast. We're watching in real time this terrible mistake in the Philippines. 1,900 people killed in the first 7 weeks in the so-called war on drugs. And whereas in Portugal, people I mean, the Portuguese government, first of all, everybody in Portugal has free health care. So they stopped treating drug addiction as a crime, started treating it as a medical issue. And drug addicts are now they can get their drugs, and they can get clean syringes if they're using injectable drugs. And we're talking all drugs, LSD, cocaine, heroin, you name it. I mean, but the big ones, of course, are heroin and pot. But they decriminalized everything and had this really, really good result. Whereas here in the United States, there was just a story, I think it was Indiana, might have been Ohio, somewhere in the Midwest, where something like 18 people had died over the course of a day or two because a new batch of heroin arrived and it had been cut with fentanyl or one of these other pharmaceutical drugs that are actually far more potent than heroin. Yes, heroin is not the most potent or addictive opioid drug. There are a number of prescription drugs that are more powerful than heroin. And, in many parts of the world, heroin is used I believe, as a pharmaceutical. It's dihydromorphine, I think is the chemical name for it. And it's just, heroin is just morphine that has had, a slight change to its molecular structure that makes it a little bit more potent than morphine, or arguably a lot more potent than morphine. But this is, it's simple lessons for us. How to figure this stuff out. I mean, it's just simple lessons. But there's so much money to be made here in the United States. Oh, and these people who are dying in the United States because they're getting heroin that's laced with, that's been cut with pharmaceuticals. That's because the heroin is illegal, right? I mean, you're not going to end heroin addiction by outlawing it, particularly when you consider that it is, by and large, a medical problem. I mean, addiction is a medical problem. Whether it's addiction to caffeine, to nicotine, to heroin, you name it, alcohol. These are medical problems that should be treated as medical problems. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day. Okay, I'm calling him Donald Trump for the moment. John in Walnut, California. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, good morning.
Hey, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Okay, so basically, talking about bringing the EPA to its knees, I don't know for sure about all of it. I know that I wasn't thrilled with Trump, but I voted for him. But this has been real quick. This has been my deal for the last 8 years. I own a small trucking company, just one truck. I get forced into several different regulations, including buying a new truck. But then most of the guys around me, I follow the law. Half of them don't. My prices don't keep up with the demand of the price of my truck. And so I struggle. And I'm not saying we don't need the regulations. I'm saying it's not being enforced.
What specific regulation are you talking about, John?
Specifically, putting traps on our trucks so that we don't send carbon dioxide up into the air.
So the equivalent of a catalytic converter?
Yes,
it's
for semis.
Yeah, that's not to take out carbon dioxide. That is to take out the particulate matter that's associated with diesel, with burning diesel. There is no technology right now deployed on our cars that stops carbon dioxide. And
half of us, because we followed the law, are being brought to our knees, but the other half, they're sliding under the law and nobody does anything about it.
And meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of children are developing asthma, and tens of thousands of people are developing lung cancer because of the products coming out of those trucks that are not following the law. So, John, the challenge is not to do away with the regulation. The challenge is to make sure that everybody's following the regulation, because regulations are they're just simply consumer protections by and large. We have somebody on my Twitter feed pointed out we have an endocrine system. We all have a regulating system in our body. We regulate our temperature. I mean, systems need balances. And what Trump is trying to do, and the Republicans have been trying to do forever, is do away with those regulating systems so that the billionaires and the bandits can make off with more and more. So,
But in my last 6 years, I wind up almost on the street because of the regulation.
Oh, come on, John. You're telling me you're winding up on the street because how much does a catalytic converter cost you?
No, the truck, $145,000 compared to a truck that I had paid for.
Right.
So, see, somebody wants to have a big argument with me, and I don't. I'm just saying that I get put to the bottom of the list as far as being able to make my family survive and end up on the same government programs that people talk about, and I would just as soon be able to survive.
So would you rather have more people in America be dying of asthma and cancer?
Then my family be on the street, yes.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, at least you know what your priorities are. John, thanks for the call. Cora in Taos, New Mexico. Hey, Cora, what's up?
I'm just concerned that Trump is bringing out the worst in us, and part of it's the name calling.
Yeah.
Part of it's the condoning violence against the right wing, where he got socked in the head.
Richard Spencer?
A, I don't think it's productive.
Yeah.
B, I think it gives fodder to the right wing to point the finger at us. And C, how's that stopping the oligarchy?
Yeah, no, good points all, Cora. Thanks a lot for the call. Lynette in New York City. Hey, Lynette, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to thank you for being in service to the great God. Truth, telling the truth. God, it's so refreshing.
We try to do our best here.
My question was, you said that there hadn't been a legitimate Republican president since MacArthur. You said that earlier.
No, since
and
Eisenhower.
I was like, oh, right, let me call. And you're absolutely right. So what are we going to do to reform the government so that this doesn't keep happening? Obama was supposed to reform the Electoral College. I mean, Bush stole it from Gore, then he stole it from Kerry. I mean, it keeps happening.
Yeah. It's
it's a coup d'etat. And in any country, what precedes revolution is a coup d'etat.
Typically.
How many coups are we going to sit through?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Lynette. Excuse me. I don't know the answer to the question. What I do know is that if we want to do, and thank you very much for the call, is that if we want to do something about this, we need to, number one, get money out of politics. And the only reason the money is in politics as deeply as it is, the only reason that you've got groups of billionaires sitting around, whether it's David Brock going to them in Florida or whether it's, every Republican in the country, making pilgrimages to Las Vegas to see Sheldon Adelson or to Kansas to see the Koch brothers. The only reason it's happening is because the Supreme Court changed the rules of the game. In 1973, after all the Nixon scandals, including Nixon bribery scandals, because yes, Nixon was being bribed, and it's a matter of the record. In the wake of that, Congress passed some fairly strong laws to get money out of politics, and groups that wanted to continue to fund politicians, to buy politicians, to own politicians, fought that, took it to the Supreme Court. It made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court in 1976, and the decision came down in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo that giving money to politicians, supporting political parties, things like that, was not bribery. It was not a behavior that could be regulated by law. It was instead, quote, free speech. Now, it took a while for that to settle in, that 1976 decision. It took it really started rearing its ugly head in the 1980s during the Reagan administration as political bribery, to paraphrase Jimmy Carter, in oligarchy began to creep across the Republican Party and then began to infiltrate in some ways and in some parts even the Democratic Party. And now we've got this situation where it's all about the money. I would be willing to bet just about anything. If Scott Pruitt had been taking money from Greenpeace instead of from ExxonMobil, he'd have very different policies. And in fact, you can look through the list of Republican lawmakers who are climate deniers, which is the vast majority of them, and see where they're getting their money from the fossil fuel industry. I mean, this is not rocket science. So get the money out of politics. How do you do that? You pass an amendment to the Constitution which says money is not speech. It is, it's money. And that corporations are not people, they're corporations. Very simple stuff. And there's an organization committed to making this happen. It's called movetoamend.org that I commend to you. It's a great organization. It's really worth supporting their work. And there are other groups, other coalitions all around the country that are working on these issues as well. From Roots Action to Progressive Democrats of America to ourfuture.org. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of them. And we need to get active in those areas. And by the way, over 500, I think over 600 now, communities and a couple of states have had non-binding ballot initiatives saying we want to have a constitutional amendment that says money isn't speech and corporations aren't people. In other words, repeal Citizens United, roll back Citizens United, because the Supreme Court has been saying this stuff, with absolute impunity. They're making law. It doesn't say in the Constitution that they can. Speaking of which, Al in Briarcliff Manor, New Jersey, you wanted to talk about judicial review?
Hi, Tom.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay. First of all, just wanted to say I love your show, and I'm so appreciative for everything that you've done and all the guests you've had and all the great topics.
Thank you, Al.
I did want to talk to you about judicial review. When I saw something on the internet a couple of years ago, I was thinking wow, this looks like a right-wing troll of Thom Hartmann, because I was so surprised that I thought it was always sort of a right-wing talking point to say.
It was a right-wing talking point. It became a right-wing talking point after Brown versus Board of Education in '54, when the right wing was very upset that the Supreme Court decided to force integration on people, or at least on states that were still segregated. And then it became another right-wing talking point after 1973 with Roe v. Wade. But, judicial review has done a lot of damage to people on both the right and the left over the years.
Well, yeah, but I mean, one of the fundamental pillars of democracy is an independent judiciary.
Right, but independent, not superior. You're talking, what I'm talking about here is not just judicial review, but the doctrine of judicial supremacy that the Supreme Court basically announced in 1803 in the Madison versus Marbury case. And Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time, who won that case, and therefore he couldn't contest it. But in that case, what the Supreme Court did in 1803 was they struck down the Judicial Act of 1797, as I recall, and which said that the papers saying that you are now a judge had to be hand delivered, and or maybe it said the opposite.
I'm familiar with Marbury versus Madison.
Okay, and Thomas Jefferson said, if this ruling stands, then indeed has the Constitution become a thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary. He was so outraged. The newspapers across America were so outraged. The politicians were so outraged with the Marbury decision that the Supreme Court did not exercise judicial supremacy or judicial review again until 1854. It took that long, or 1856, I guess it was. Whenever Dred Scott had it was 1856, wasn't it, Dred Scott? That was only the second time in the history of the United States, 70 years as an independent nation. Only twice did the Supreme Court say we have the power to either strike down a law or to make a law. And in Dred Scott, they made Roger Taney essentially made a law saying that African Americans were property, not persons. And it led right to the Civil War. I mean, the judicial review and judicial supremacy are not in the Constitution. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution I'm sorry. Go ahead, Al. Say what you want to say.
Well, the whole point is that there are checks and balances on the court, and as we know from the experience with FDR, that the court's power is not in practicality absolute. So that is why you have a discussion in the Federalist Papers in Federal 78 about the fact that
78, 79, 80, and 81, yes.
Going to have the power of the purse. The court is going to be the least dangerous branch of government. And the one, thing that I really want to emphasize that, I would challenge anybody to contest is that if you read the Federalist Papers cover to cover, as I have, the main theme of the Federalist Papers is that Congress is and will always be the most dangerous branch of government. And the only way to have a system of checks and balances is to have the three, not co-equal, but three branches able to check one another. And if you have a system where Congress can just say, oh, the Supreme Court doesn't get to decide things, first of all, you're violating the first sentence of Article 3, and you're violating the whole concept of a system of checks and balances.
No, you're not, Al.
And
There is the check. No, when Thomas Jefferson was asked by Spencer Roane, he sent that letter to Spencer Roane in complaining about the Marbury case. And Roane said, if the Supreme Court isn't going to be the supreme power in our land, who is? And Thomas Jefferson replied, the people themselves. Larry Kramer, the dean of the law school at Stanford University, wrote a book called The People Themselves, making the exact same argument that I am making, by the way. And he's no conservative, to the best of my knowledge. Article 3, Section 2 says explicitly, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. In other words, the Supreme Court is subordinate to Congress. And the Supreme Court should not have the power.
Read the first sentence of Article 3. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested
In one Supreme Court and in such
in such inferior courts as the Congress.
But the judicial power of the Supreme Court is defined. Okay. Al, we're talking in circles here, and I get it. You love judicial review and supremacy, and I don't. And we'll just have to leave it at that. I don't know what I can say. I think that the Supreme Court historically, if you look at what it has done, it has done, frankly, more harm than good by creating law. And it is not the place that you want to go for your remedies. Al, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Tom, watching Free Speech TV in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I love your show, Guy.
Thanks.
You provide a great service to the country.
Doing my best.
I was thinking about some things, and I listened to everybody talk, and of course, if Hillary Clinton would have won the election, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations.
Yeah, well, arguably she did, but that's a whole other issue.
Well, but you can't have an East and a West Coast dominate everything, whether it's population or money. So the Electoral College has a reason. I'm not necessarily sold one way or the other, but I can see the reason. My thing is, I was thinking when I was a little boy, living with my parents, living with my grandparents, who they all worked in the coal mines. And I remember my grandfather reading the Daily Worker even.
Mm-hmm.
But those were the days when I grew up in a steel town. My dad worked in the steel mills. I worked in the steel mills for years. And then I had my own business, employed people. But Democrats were different. Democrats were the working class. Now I see the Democrats, and all of a sudden, I don't mean this in a bad way because I voted for Hillary, but for some reason they seem to have taken on this complexion of the Brown Party.
Mm-hmm.
They don't work anymore for the middle class. The people in Youngstown, Pennsylvania, and these places that have been decimated by NAFTA and by Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
And the
World if you go back,
and the Third Way,
Tom,
those are not Democrats. And people that call themselves progressive, they're not even Democrats. I mean, we wouldn't even be having this discussion, or would need to, if the Democrats weren't taken over by
the DLC. Al Fromm wrote a book around 1990 bragging about the DLC, about how him and Bill Clinton had created this thing in 1989 or 87, one or the other, and wrote it into the White House in 1992. And basically the strategy was, okay, the Republicans have destroyed the labor base. Blue-collar jobs are leaving the United States. They're never going to come back. The unions are not a reliable funding mechanism for the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party needs money. So what are we going to do? If we're not going to be the party of the blue-collar worker, who are we going to be the party of? And the decision that they made was that the coming wave was going to be technology and digital and all this kind of stuff. And so let's become the party of the white-collar worker. Let's become the party of the top 10%, the people making $60,000 to $250,000 a year. And they've been actually true to that. And Thomas Frank documents this in his book, Listen Liberal. He points out that while the Republicans have consistently, basically since the 1960s, been the party of the top 1%, the Democrats have consistently been the party of the top 10%. And the bottom 90% are get completely ignored. I mean, this is the study that came out of Princeton a little while ago, that if you're in the bottom 90%, what you want to happen legislatively is about as likely to happen as random noise. Whereas if you're in the top 10%, you have a pretty good chance of things happening. And if you're in the top 1%, you have a really good chance of things happening. I agree with you, Tom. We need to take the party, the Democratic Party, back to its FDR, Lyndon Johnson, Great Society, Bernie Sanders roots. Thanks, Tom. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Chris in Denver. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I was just a little taken aback by your comment that the Supreme Court has done nothing good. You know, I'm
no, I didn't. Let me be very clear. You know, when the Supreme, well, actually, make your point. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Well, I'm the child of an interracial marriage, and so I was very impacted by Loving versus Virginia, and I'm gay, so I was also impacted by the recent decision that allowed gay marriage. I'm married now.
Right.
So, I mean, and they essentially did legislate gay marriage because the legislatures were unable to do it. And in my view, it was perfectly acceptable for them to say that it's constitutional to allow interracial and gay marriage. And those were both things that they legislated because Republicans had blocked that legislation for so long.
So what you're saying, Chris, is that you're quite comfortable with giving control over literally all the laws in the United States to 9 people who are not elected and are not answerable to the people and serve for life, who are essentially, I mean, we had an argument about the word king earlier. These people actually functionally are kings. And I get it that you've benefited from that, but what if they had ruled against you? And, you know, where I started this whole thing was the idea that money is speech. This was an ideology, a doctrine that, frankly, is extraordinarily pernicious. And had the Supreme Court not passed that, then, you know, homophobic billionaires might not have been preventing gay marriage from state after state after state. The Supreme Court typically is behind the curve. Usually their decisions, you know, occasionally they're ahead of the curve. In Brown, in Roe, in the case the gay marriage in Loving, there have been a couple of cases where they've been ahead of the curve, and arguably the Griswold back in 1965, I think it was, where they,
or even the one that happened in the first decade of
sure, we can all recite decisions that we right, we can, yeah, exactly, yeah, that's Loving. And Texas versus Loving. We can all cite cases that we like where we got what we wanted out of the Supreme Court. You're about to have a generation of a Supreme Court that is going to be run by Antonin Scalia's. And they're, number one, probably going to start repealing those decisions that you are so fond of because they can, because they're unelected kings. And number two,
one appointment right now. He's not going to be making, and he's not going to. I mean, hopefully, Democrats will take over the Senate in 2 years, and because it's been Trump has been such a disaster.
Chris, your argument is let's hope that the kings are benevolent. What happened to government by the people?
I'm not against a term limit for the Supreme Court, like saying each president.
No, I'm not saying term limits. I'm saying go back to the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court shall operate under such regulations as Congress shall make. The Supreme Court is this is what Hamilton thought was real. As the earlier caller who was trying to argue for judicial supremacy was quoting Hamilton in Federalist 78. Hamilton says, yeah, the courts are the least likely to cause mischief. We wrote that into the Constitution. We put them under the control of Congress. Well, the Supreme Court rolls up and said, no, we're not under the control of Congress.
Well, I think that the point that you have checks and balances and three.
These are not checks and balances. If you have one branch of government that has absolute control, absolute say that they can literally strike down any law and they can make law out of nothing. No legislative process. No legislature in the United States ever, no state legislature, no federal legislature has ever passed a law saying that corporations should be recognized as human beings, as persons. But the Supreme Court did in 1886, and it's been repeated 34 times. No legislature ever said that giving money to politicians is free speech. Frankly, even Republican politicians hate the fact that they have to spend half their day every day raising money. But the Supreme Court did. You know, this is, in my opinion, wrong. Judicial review and judicial supremacy are wrong. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. It's a conversation that, you know, every year or so seems to come around. I guess we're going to repeat it again now, particularly with, you know, a new Supreme Court nominee coming down the road. I think, you know, if you want to cut off the power of the Supreme Court before it goes too hard right, now is the time to do it. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us. And don't forget, democracy begins with you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. In his inauguration speech last week, President Trump made a big foreign policy promise.
We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth.
Trump had long criticized his predecessor, President Obama, for not using the phrase radical Islamic terrorism. Trump's other bravado came in his pledge to eradicate terrorism altogether, instead of talking about it as President Obama did as a generational struggle, one that could not be solved by the military alone.
And they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.